Hello there and welcome. I'm so glad you found your way here tonight. Before we begin, take a moment to get comfortable. Adjust your pillow, let your body settle into whatever position feels right. There's no rush. We have all the time in the world. Where in the world are you right now? A quiet bedroom as the night deepens? A cozy corner where the weight of the day is finally lifting? Wherever you are, you're exactly where you need to be. Tonight we're going to explore something that fascinates and mystifies many people. How certain families remain wealthy not just for one generation, but for centuries. We'll discover the quiet strategies, the unspoken rules, and the carefully cultivated mindsets that allow old money to preserve itself across time. This isn't about lottery winners or sudden tech fortunes. This is about the families whose names appear on museum wings and university buildings, whose wealth seems to exist in some realm beyond the volatility that affects everyone else. We'll learn how they think about money differently, how they structure their lives and legacies, and what principles guide their decisions across generations. But don't worry. This isn't going to be a frantic exploration of wealth-building tactics or a stressful examination of what you should be doing differently. Instead, we'll move slowly and thoughtfully through the world of enduring wealth, understanding the psychology, the systems, and the sometimes surprising simplicity behind multi-generational prosperity. By the end, I think you'll find that old money's longevity isn't about secrets at all, but about patience, perspective, and a fundamentally different relationship with wealth itself. If you enjoy these calm explorations of how the world really works, a like and subscribe really helps reach others seeking the same peaceful way to end their day. And to those already subscribed, thank you for being part of this community of thoughtful listeners. So settle in, let your shoulders drop away from your ears, take a slow breath, in through your nose, out through your mouth, and let's begin our gentle drift through the world of old money, through centuries of accumulated wisdom toward understanding how true wealth persists. There's nowhere you need to be, no deadlines to meet. Just listen, and let the story unfold like a long, quiet conversation between old friends. If you drift away, that's perfectly fine. That's what we're here for. Let's begin by understanding what old money actually is and why it's so different from new wealth. When most people think about the wealthy, they think about the latest billionaire, the tech founder whose company just went public, the celebrity whose earnings make headlines. This is new money, wealth that appeared suddenly, dramatically, in a single lifetime, and there's nothing wrong with new money. It's exciting, visible, often earned through genuine innovation or talent. But it's also statistically fragile. Most new fortunes don't survive to the third generation. There's even a saying among wealth advisors, shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. The first generation builds the wealth, the second generation maintains it, and the third generation loses it. Old money is different. Old money is wealth that has survived multiple generations, sometimes dozens of them, persisting through wars, depressions, technological revolutions, and complete transformations of the economic landscape. These are the families whose ancestors made fortunes in railroads or banking in the 1800s, whose great-great-grandparents built shipping empires or owned vast tracts of land. The wealth has been passed down so many times that no living family member remembers being anything other than wealthy. The Rothschilds, whose banking empire began in the late 1700s, remain wealthy today. The Rockefellers, whose fortune was built on oil in the late 1800s, are now in their 7th generation of wealth. The Vanderbilts, the Astors, the Cabots, the Lowells, some of these families have maintained significant wealth, while others have seen it disperse, but the successful ones share common characteristics that we'll explore tonight. What makes old money fascinating isn't just the amount of wealth, though that can be staggering. It's the durability. It's the fact that this wealth has survived circumstances that destroyed countless other fortunes. Think about everything that happened in the 20th century alone. 2 world wars, the Great Depression, multiple recessions, the end of colonialism, the rise and fall of the Soviet Union, the digital revolution. Through all of this, certain families remained wealthy, their resources not just intact but often growing. How is this possible? The answer isn't what most people expect. It's not about having the best investment strategies or the smartest financial advisors, though those things help. It's not about working harder or being more talented, though drive and ability certainly play roles in the initial wealth creation. The answer is something deeper, something about structure and psychology, and a completely different way of relating to money itself. Old money doesn't think about wealth the way new money does. The goals are different. The time frames are different. The very definition of success is different. Let's start with something fundamental. Old money is almost never about personal consumption. When you hear about someone buying their 5th yacht or their 3rd private jet, that's almost certainly new money. Old money might have yachts and jets, yes, but these are viewed as tools or as family assets, not as trophies. The difference is subtle, but crucial. New money often seeks to display wealth, to prove success, to enjoy the fruits of their labour in visible, dramatic ways. There's a hunger to it, an excitement, a sense of I made it and I'm going to enjoy it. This is completely understandable. They worked hard, they succeeded, they want to celebrate. Old money doesn't have that hunger because they never experienced the lack that preceded wealth. They were born into it. They've never known anything else. So the psychological drive to prove their worth through consumption simply doesn't exist in the same way. Instead, wealth is something to be managed, preserved, passed on. It's a responsibility, a trust, almost a burden. This fundamentally changes how they interact with money. Consider the concept of liquidity. New money often wants access to their wealth. They want to know they can spend it, enjoy it, use it. They keep significant amounts in easily accessible forms. Old money does the opposite. Old money ties up wealth in structures that make it difficult to spend impulsively. Trusts, foundations, family partnerships, illiquid investments. These aren't just tax strategies, though they serve that purpose too. They're guardrails against the very human tendency to consume wealth rather than preserve it. There's a story, probably apocryphal but illustrative, about a young Rockefeller heir who wanted to buy an expensive sports car. He was told that the family could certainly afford it, but accessing the funds would require convening the family trust committee, submitting a formal request, and explaining how the purchase aligned with family values and long-term wealth preservation goals. The process would take weeks and require him to justify his desire to a group of family elders and advisors. He decided the car wasn't worth the hassle. That's the point. The structure isn't there to prevent spending, the family could easily afford the car, but to make impulsive consumption difficult enough that it rarely happens. This principle extends to everything. Old money families often live well below their means, not because they're stingy, but because conspicuous consumption is viewed as vulgar, as new money behaviour. They might live in beautiful homes, but those homes are often inherited, purchased generations ago, maintained carefully but not ostentatiously updated. They might wear expensive clothes, but those clothes are classic, understated, designed to last for years. The idea of buying something just because it's trendy or to impress others is anathema to old money culture. There's a practical reason for this beyond just cultural preference. Every dollar spent on consumption is a dollar that can't compound for future generations. Old money thinks in terms of generations, not years. They're not asking, quote, one. They're asking, what will this capital base enable for my great-great-grandchildren? This completely changes the calculus. $1 million spent on a luxury today is money that could have been 10 million or 50 million or more for descendants a century from now, depending on investment returns. From that perspective, consumption looks different. It looks like spending future generations' inheritance on present gratification. This isn't to say old money families are ascetic or joyless. They're not. They enjoy beautiful things, wonderful experiences, comfortable lives, but they do so within carefully maintained boundaries, with an awareness of stewardship that transcends individual desire. The wealth doesn't belong to them personally. They're merely the current custodians of a family resource that extends backward to ancestors and forward to descendants not yet born. Let's think about that for a moment. Let yourself sit with that concept. Imagine if you thought about your resources not as yours to use as you please, but as something you're temporarily managing for people you'll never meet. How would that change your decisions? It would change almost everything, wouldn't it? That's the psychological foundation of old money preservation. Another fundamental principle is diversification, but not in the way most people understand it. Yes, old money spreads wealth across different investments, stocks, bonds, real estate, private equity, art, even farmland and forests. But the diversification goes deeper than asset classes. It's geographic, spanning multiple countries and continents. It's temporal, with some investments designed for quick returns and others meant to pay off decades from now. It's structural, split across multiple legal entities and jurisdictions, and it's familial, with different family branches sometimes having separate pools of capital. This extreme diversification serves multiple purposes. It protects against catastrophic loss. Even if one country's economy collapses, or one sector implodes, or one family member makes terrible decisions, the overall wealth survives. It also protects against political risk. Families who have maintained wealth for centuries have lived through revolutions, expropriations, regime changes. They've learned not to keep all their resources in one country's jurisdiction. No matter how stable that country seems, history has taught them that political situations can change with stunning speed, and wealth that's too concentrated geographically can disappear. The Rothschilds famously established banking operations in 5 different European countries: England, France, Austria, Naples, and Germany, in the early 1800s. Each branch was run by a different son of Mayor Amschel Rothschild. This wasn't just business expansion. It was a deliberate strategy to ensure that even if one country's political situation deteriorated, the family's wealth wouldn't be concentrated in that single place. When Napoleon's wars ravaged Europe, when revolutions swept through in 1848, when world wars destroyed old orders, the Rothschild family wealth survived because no single political event could destroy all of it simultaneously. This geographic distribution also created what we might call jurisdictional arbitrage, the ability to operate under whichever legal system was most favourable at any given time, to move resources to wherever they were safest and most productive. Modern old money families continue this practice, though now it's implemented through international corporate structures, trusts in multiple countries, investments spanning continents. It seems complex, and it is, but the underlying principle is simple. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, especially when that basket is subject to political winds beyond your control. Let's talk about the role of family structure in preserving wealth. This is where old money becomes almost anthropologically interesting, because these families have developed specific cultural practices, norms, and institutions that serve wealth preservation, whether or not that's their explicit purpose. First, there's the matter of marriage. Old money families tend to marry within their social class. This isn't always about snobbery, though that can be part of it. It's about shared values and understanding. Someone who grew up with wealth understands the responsibilities and expectations that come with it. They understand the family structures, the trusts, the foundations. They've been socialized into a particular way of relating to money. Someone who marries into old money from outside that world has to learn these things, has to adapt to a culture that can seem strange and restrictive. Some do this successfully, but it's easier when both parties share similar backgrounds. There's also a practical element. Marriages within the same social class tend to be marriages between different pools of wealth, effectively merging resources, or at least ensuring that both sides bring financial sophistication to the union. Divorce becomes less of a financial catastrophe because both parties have their own resources. Prenuptial agreements are standard. Not because of mistrust, but because protecting family wealth across generations requires legal clarity about what happens if marriages end. Children in old money families are socialized into wealth from birth. They learn early that money comes with responsibilities. They often aren't told the full extent of family wealth until they're adults. There's a deliberate effort to ensure they develop their own identities and work ethics before learning they'll never need to work for financial survival. They attend the same schools, summer at the same places, join the same clubs. This creates networks that last lifetimes, networks that become crucial for business, for marriages, for maintaining social position. Education is taken extremely seriously, but not primarily for career purposes. Old money children often attend the best schools not to get jobs, but to develop intellectual capabilities, to make connections, to absorb the cultural capital that marks them as educated and sophisticated. The Ivy League universities, the elite boarding schools, the prestigious graduate programs, these serve as much as social finishing schools as educational institutions. The actual knowledge gained matters less than the credential and the network. Many old money heirs do work, but their careers often have a particular character. They might join the family business or family office, managing the wealth itself. They might pursue careers in fields that carry prestige but not necessarily high income: academia, art, non-profit leadership, politics. They might start their own ventures, but these are often passion projects rather than necessary for income. The work serves to give purpose and identity, to contribute to society, to avoid the aimlessness that can afflict those who don't need to work. But it's understood that the work is optional in a way that it isn't for most people. This changes the relationship to work itself. There's often an emphasis on public service and philanthropy. This serves multiple purposes. It fulfills a sense of noblesse oblige, the idea that wealth carries obligations to contribute to society. It provides purpose and meaning. It also, quite practically, maintains social capital and political connections that can be useful in protecting family interests. Foundations bearing family names serve to perpetuate family identity and values across generations. They also provide employment for family members and loyal retainers, creating ecosystems that support the family structure. As you listen to this, let your breathing slow. Let these concepts wash over you. We're building an understanding layer by layer, piece by piece, of how a completely different world operates. There's no need to memorize any of this. Just let it settle in your mind like sediment in still water. Old money families often have what's called a family office, a private company that exists solely to manage the family's wealth. Small family offices might have a few employees managing investments, taxes, estate planning. Large ones are essentially private financial institutions with dozens or even hundreds of employees managing billions in assets. These offices handle everything financial, so family members don't have to. They pay bills, manage investments, handle taxes, coordinate with lawyers and accountants, oversee properties. They create a buffer between the family and the complexity of maintaining great wealth. The family office structure has several advantages. It provides continuity. Staff members often stay for decades, developing deep understanding of family needs and preferences. It allows for extreme customization. Every investment strategy, every tax approach, every estate plan is tailored specifically to this family's situation. It maintains privacy. Unlike investing with public financial institutions, the family office keeps all information internal, and perhaps most importantly, it professionalizes wealth management, removing it from the emotional realm of family relationships. This professionalization is crucial because family dynamics and financial decisions make a volatile mix. Imagine trying to discuss investment strategy at Thanksgiving dinner. Imagine siblings arguing about whether to sell the family business. Imagine cousins fighting over who gets the beach house. These conflicts can destroy families and dissipate wealth. The family office provides structure and professional mediation. Decisions are made through formal processes with input from experts, documented in ways that reduce personal conflict. Many old money families also have family constitutions or mission statements, actual documents that articulate family values, goals for the wealth, decision-making processes, expectations for behaviour. These might seem overly formal, even cold, but they provide clarity and reduce conflict. When everyone knows the rules, when there's an established process for handling disagreements, when values are explicit rather than assumed, families are more likely to stay together and wealth is more likely to be preserved. Think about this structure for a moment. These families have essentially created private governments with constitutions, bureaucracies, and systems for managing their affairs. The wealth isn't just money in accounts, it's an institution, with all the structures that implies. This institutional quality is perhaps the single most important factor in wealth preservation. Money alone isn't durable, institutions are. Let's consider the investment philosophy of old money, because this is where their approach differs most dramatically from how most people invest. The typical investor, whether investing for retirement or managing new wealth, is trying to maximize returns. They want their money to grow as much and as fast as possible. They track performance quarterly or even daily. They compare themselves to market indices and to other investors. They feel anxiety when markets drop and exhilaration when they rise. Investing is active, emotionally engaging, focused on performance. Old money doesn't invest this way at all. Their primary goal isn't maximizing returns. It's preserving capital across generations while generating enough income to support family lifestyle and activities. This completely different objective leads to completely different strategies. First, old money is extraordinarily patient. They invest with time horizons measured in decades, not years. They don't care about quarterly performance. They barely care about annual performance. What matters is whether the capital base, adjusted for inflation and family draws, is intact or growing over generational timeframes. This patience allows them to invest in assets that might take years or decades to pay off, but that have fundamental value. Timberland that takes 30 years to mature, real estate development projects that take a decade to complete, private companies that need time to grow before going public or being sold. Second, they're willing to accept lower returns in exchange for stability and preservation. The classic old money portfolio might include significant allocations to government bonds, high-quality municipal bonds, blue-chip dividend-paying stocks, assets that won't generate spectacular returns, but that are unlikely to disappear. The goal is steady, reliable, boring growth. A 4 or 5% real return over decades compounds into substantial wealth, and it does so without the anxiety and risk of chasing higher returns. Third, they often hold substantial illiquid investments, things that can't be quickly sold, private companies, real estate, art, forests, farmland. These investments serve multiple purposes. They often provide tax advantages. They're insulated from market volatility. There's no daily price quote telling you your forest decreased in value by 3% today. They can appreciate over very long time frames, and crucially, they can't be impulsively sold during market panics or family disputes. The illiquidity is a feature, not a bug. It prevents the kind of panic selling that destroys wealth during market crashes. Many old money families still own the businesses their ancestors founded, or at least significant stakes in them. Rockefeller descendants still have connections to ExxonMobil, the descendant of Standard Oil. Mars family members still own Mars Candy Company. These holdings often represent the core of family wealth, sometimes held for over a century. The temptation to sell and diversify is strong. Financial advisors often recommend against having too much wealth in a single company. But old money understands something important. These businesses, if well managed, can generate wealth for centuries. Selling converts a perpetual income stream into a one-time pile of cash that then has to be managed. Sometimes holding is wiser than diversifying. There's also what we might call legacy investing. investments made not primarily for financial return but to preserve family values, support communities, or maintain family identity. A family might keep owning a local newspaper even though it's not very profitable, because it's been in the family for generations and plays an important community role. They might maintain forests or farms even when selling for development would be more lucrative. Because these properties carry family history and environmental values, the purely financial calculation wouldn't support these holdings, but the broader family calculus does. Let your mind rest for a moment with these ideas. Notice how different this approach is from conventional investment thinking. Notice the patience, the willingness to sacrifice maximum returns for stability, the integration of non-financial values into financial decisions. This is wealth as stewardship, not wealth as scorekeeping. Old money families are also extraordinarily risk-averse in some ways and surprisingly risk-tolerant in others. They're risk-averse about the core capital base. That must be protected above all else. Conservative investments, multiple layers of legal protection, geographic and asset diversification, all designed to ensure that the foundation of wealth can't be destroyed. But they can be quite risk-tolerant with a portion of their capital, making speculative investments, funding startups, buying art from unknown artists. They can afford to take these risks because they're only risking a small percentage of total wealth. If the speculative investments pay off, wonderful. If not, the core wealth remains intact. This creates what's sometimes called a barbell strategy. Extremely conservative core holdings plus a small allocation to high-risk, high-reward opportunities with not much in between. It's different from the typical balanced portfolio approach, but it makes sense given old money's goals and resources. They don't need to take risks to meet their financial needs, so the core can be conservative, but they have enough capital that they can afford to take some risks for potential outsized returns or because something interests them. There's also a tendency toward contrarian investing, buying when others are selling, staying calm during panics, taking advantage of others' fear. When the stock market crashes and everyone is desperate to sell, old money often buys. They have the capital to deploy when assets are cheap, and they have the patience to wait for recovery. The 2008 financial crisis, the dot-com bust, even the Great Depression, these were disasters for many but opportunities for those with capital and courage to invest when prices were low. Warren Buffett's famous advice to be fearful when others are greedy and greedy when others are fearful is old money thinking expressed concisely. Let's think about the tax strategies that old money employs, because this is crucial to preservation but often misunderstood. The popular image is that the wealthy use loopholes and tricks to avoid paying their fair share. The reality is more complex and often quite legal, built into tax codes specifically designed to encourage certain behaviours. The foundation of old money tax strategy is simple. Minimize taxable income and maximize unrealized appreciation. Income is taxed every year. Capital gains are only taxed when assets are sold. Therefore, structure your wealth to generate minimal income and maximum capital appreciation, and avoid selling appreciated assets. Instead, borrow against them when you need cash. The borrowed money isn't income, so it isn't taxed. The assets continue to appreciate. When you die, those assets pass to heirs with a step-up in basis, meaning the appreciation that occurred during your lifetime is never taxed. Your heirs inherit the assets at their current value, and the process starts over. This is called Quote 4, and it's perfectly legal. It's how many old money families avoid income taxes almost entirely while still accessing wealth to fund their lifestyles. They own assets that appreciate: stocks, real estate, art, businesses. They borrow against those assets at low interest rates. They live on the borrowed money. When they die, their heirs inherit the appreciated assets without paying capital gains tax on the appreciation. The heirs can then sell some assets to pay off the debt, or continue the borrowing strategy themselves. Charitable giving is another core strategy. donating appreciated assets to charity provides a tax deduction for the full current value, while avoiding capital gains tax on the appreciation. Setting up private foundations allows families to donate assets, get the tax deduction, but maintain control over how that money is ultimately used for charitable purposes. The foundation might employ family members, fund causes the family cares about, perpetuate the family name. It's genuine philanthropy, but it's also tax-advantaged wealth management and legacy building. Trusts are foundational to old money tax strategy. Generation skip-in trusts allow wealth to pass to grandchildren, or even great-grandchildren, while minimizing estate taxes. Qualified personal residence trusts allow families to transfer homes to heirs at reduced tax cost. Charitable remainder trusts provide income during life and donate remaining assets to charity at death, providing tax deductions and estate tax benefits. The variety of trust structures is enormous, each designed for specific purposes, but all serving the broader goal of transferring wealth across generations while minimizing tax erosion. Some families take the additional step of creating family limited partnerships or family LLCs. Assets are transferred into these entities. Then partnership interests are given to family members. The interests can be valued at discounts because they're minority stakes in non-publicly traded entities with limited liquidity. This allows more wealth to be transferred to heirs before estate tax limits are reached. It sounds complex, and it is, but the principle is straightforward. Use legal structures to reduce the taxable value of wealth being transferred. Old money also plans estate transfers years or decades in advance. They don't wait until death is imminent. They begin transferring wealth to heirs while still alive, using annual gift tax exclusions to move wealth tax-free over time. They set up trusts when children are young. They structure businesses and properties in ways that facilitate transfer. By the time death occurs, much of the wealth has already been legally moved to the next generation. Minimizing estate taxes. It's important to understand that these strategies aren't about cheating or breaking rules. They're about using the tax code as it's written, taking advantage of provisions that exist specifically to encourage certain behaviors: charitable giving, business ownership, long-term investing. Congress could eliminate these provisions at any time. They generally don't because there's political support for encouraging philanthropy, for keeping businesses in families, for promoting long-term investment over short-term trading. Old money simply uses these provisions systematically and comprehensively in ways that most people don't. Let yourself rest with this information. Let it settle. We're not judging whether these strategies are fair or right. We're simply observing how they work, understanding the mechanics of wealth preservation. Notice how structure and planning, extended over years and decades, can produce outcomes dramatically different from how most people interact with taxes. As we reach the end of this first exploration, we've begun to see that old money preservation isn't mysterious or magical. It's structural. It's the result of specific decisions, implemented systematically, oriented toward goals that span generations rather than lifetimes. It's about patience, about accepting lower consumption today to ensure wealth tomorrow, about using legal and financial structures to protect capital from taxes and from impulsive spending and from the various forces that erode wealth over time. In our next sections, we'll go deeper. We'll explore the psychology of old money, how growing up with wealth shapes thinking and behavior. We'll examine specific families and how they've maintained or lost wealth. We'll look at the challenges of passing values along with money, at the conflicts that arise, at the delicate balance between preserving tradition and adapting to changing times. But for now, let these foundations settle. Let your understanding build slowly, layer upon layer, like sediment forming rock over geological time. There's no rush. We have all night to explore this together. Let's explore now the psychology of old money, how being born into wealth creates a fundamentally different relationship with money itself, with work, with purpose, and with identity. Because understanding old money isn't just about financial strategies and legal structures. It's about mindset, about worldview, about assumptions so deeply embedded that people who grow up with wealth often don't even recognize them as assumptions rather than universal truths. Think for a moment about how most people relate to money. For the vast majority, money represents security and survival. It's what keeps a roof over your head, food on your table, medical care accessible. Money is inherently anxiety-producing because not having enough creates immediate concrete problems. People work jobs they might not love because they need the income. They save carefully for emergencies because emergencies will come. They worry about retirement because eventually they won't be able to work. Money is necessity, and necessity creates a particular psychological relationship, one of need, of vigilance, of concern. Old money doesn't experience money this way at all. From birth, they know that survival needs are met. They'll never be hungry unless by choice. They'll never be without housing. Medical care is always available. Education is assured. This fundamental security creates a completely different psychological baseline. Money isn't about survival. It's about something else entirely. About maintaining social position. About fulfilling family expectations. About stewardship and legacy. The anxiety that most people feel about money is simply absent, replaced by different concerns that seem trivial to outsiders, but are very real to those experiencing them. Imagine growing up knowing you'll inherit enough wealth that you'll never need to work. How does that shape your development? It removes the primary motivation that drives most people's career choices. You don't need to study something practical or lucrative. You don't need to worry about job security or advancement. You can pursue whatever genuinely interests you, or nothing at all if you prefer. This sounds liberating, and in some ways it is. But it also creates unique psychological challenges. One of the most significant is the question of purpose. Most people derive substantial meaning from their work, from providing for themselves and their families, from the sense that they're contributing something useful to the world. When you don't need to work for survival, you have to find purpose elsewhere. Some old money heirs find this in careers they're passionate about, in philanthropy, in family leadership roles. Others struggle with it, drifting through expensive hobbies and social events, never quite finding something that gives life meaning. The result can be a particular kind of melancholy, comfortable, even luxurious, but somewhat hollow. There's also the challenge of identity formation. Most people develop sense of self partly through their struggles, through overcoming obstacles, through the work of building a life. Old money heirs have many obstacles removed. They attend the best schools but don't struggle to pay for them. They can explore different interests without worrying about wasting time on something that won't lead to employment. They're supported through failures. This can create a kind of psychological softness, a difficulty in developing resilience and grit that comes from facing genuine hardship. Many old money families recognize this problem and deliberately create challenges for their children. They might give modest allowances rather than unlimited spending. They might require children to work summer jobs, even though the jobs serve no financial purpose. They might establish expectations that children will achieve certain milestones, graduate from university, maintain employment for a certain period, demonstrate competence in some area, before accessing trust funds. These are artificial challenges, yes, but they serve the important purpose of giving young people something to strive for, to overcome, to build identity around. The relationship between old money heirs and their parents is often complex in specific ways. Parents who inherited wealth and are now raising the next generation understand the unique challenges their children face because they face them themselves. But this shared understanding can create distance. Parents might worry about spoiling children, so they create artificial scarcity or withhold information about family wealth. Children grow up knowing they're wealthy but not understanding the extent or structure of that wealth. This can create confusion and resentment. Or parents might be emotionally absent, pursuing their own interests. Leaving children to be raised largely by nannies and boarding schools. The paradox is that children have every material advantage but might lack the emotional connection and parental engagement that children need. There's also what psychologists call wealth shame or rich kid syndrome, a kind of guilt or discomfort about unearned privilege. Young people from old money families are aware that they did nothing to earn their advantages. They watch peers work hard to achieve things that come easily to them. They might feel fraudulent, undeserving, or guilty. Some respond by hiding their wealth, downplaying their background, trying to pass as middle class. Others respond by working extraordinarily hard to prove their worth independently of family wealth. Still others become defensive, developing a sense of entitlement that says they deserve what they have even if it was inherited. The social world of old money compounds these psychological dynamics. These families often live in closed social circles, interacting primarily with others of similar background. Children attend the same schools, some are at the same resorts, join the same clubs. This creates tight social networks, but also insularity. It can be difficult to form genuine friendships when you're never quite sure whether people like you for yourself or for your family connections and wealth. There's a guardedness, a caution about revealing too much about family finances or allowing people to get too close too quickly. Dating and marriage are particularly fraught. How do you know whether someone loves you or loves your money? This question haunts many old money heirs, especially when dating outside their social class. There are stories, sometimes exaggerated but often based in truth, of young wealthy people being pursued by fortune hunters, people who feign romantic interest to access wealth. Even genuine relationships become complicated by wealth disparity. If one person has family money and the other doesn't, whose career takes precedence? How are financial decisions made? How do you navigate the difference between a partner who can call on family resources and one who can't? Many old money families strongly prefer their children marry within the same social class, and we can now understand this preference more fully. It's not just snobbery, though that can be part of it. It's about shared understanding of the unique psychological situation that wealth creates. Someone who grew up with wealth understands the pressures, the expectations, the strange guilt and privilege and responsibility that define the experience. They understand family structures like trusts and foundations. They know how to navigate the social world. They share similar values about consumption, about work, about legacy. A marriage between two people from old money families is, in some sense, easier because so much is implicitly understood. Let's talk about the concept of noblesse oblige, which is French for nobility obligates. The idea is that privilege comes with responsibility, that those who have been given much owe something back to society. This principle is deeply embedded in old money culture, though its expression varies. Some families emphasize public service, going into government, diplomacy, military leadership. The Kennedy family exemplifies this tradition, with multiple generations serving in politics despite wealth that made such service financially unnecessary. Other families emphasize philanthropy, giving away substantial portions of wealth to causes they care about. The Rockefellers, for instance, have created dozens of foundations supporting everything from medical research to environmental conservation to the arts. This commitment to giving back serves multiple purposes. On one level, it's genuine. These families often do feel a responsibility to use their resources for good, to justify their privilege through contribution. On another level, it's about maintaining social capital and political connections. Philanthropy creates gratitude, builds networks, provides access to influential people. It also provides purpose and meaning, giving heirs something significant to do with their time and resources, and it serves a protective function. Societies are more tolerant of great wealth when that wealth is seen as benefiting the broader community. Ostentatious consumption creates resentment. Thoughtful philanthropy creates appreciation. The way old money thinks about philanthropy is itself revealing. They're not just writing checks in response to emotional appeals. They're thinking strategically about how to create lasting impact, how to address root causes rather than symptoms, how to build institutions that will continue their work across generations. A middle-class person might donate to a homeless shelter in their city, responding to visible need. An old money family might create an endowed foundation to study the causes of homelessness and develop evidence-based policy solutions, then fund advocacy to implement those solutions. Both are valuable, but they're different approaches reflecting different resources and different time frames. There's also what might be called social obligation philanthropy, giving to certain causes not necessarily because you care deeply about them, but because supporting these institutions is what people in your social class do. Contributing to the symphony, the art museum, the private school you attended, the prestigious university. These donations maintain social standing, keep your name visible in the right circles, ensure your children will receive preference in admissions and social opportunities. It's philanthropy, yes, but it's also a form of social investment, maintaining the ecosystem that supports your class position. Now let's consider the old money approach to education, because this reveals much about their values and priorities. Education is taken with extraordinary seriousness, but not primarily for career preparation. The goal is cultivation, developing intellectual capabilities, cultural sophistication, social connections, and the intangible quality sometimes called breeding or class. Old money children often attend elite private schools from an early age, not because public schools couldn't educate them, but because these private schools provide immersion in the culture and values of their class. These schools teach the formal curriculum, of course, but they also teach informally how to be upper class, how to speak, how to dress, how to carry yourself, which cultural references are important, certain books, certain music, certain historical events, how to navigate social situations with ease and confidence. The actual academic content matters less than the socialization. A graduate of Exeter or Andover or Choate carries a credential that signals not just educational achievement, but class membership. The same is true, perhaps even more so, of universities. Harvard, Yale, Princeton. These aren't just excellent educational institutions. They're finishing schools for the elite, places where lasting networks are formed and class identity is reinforced. The educational experience of old money children is often notably different from that of scholarship students or newly wealthy families at the same institutions. They arrive already knowing people. Their parents went there, their siblings are there, family friends' children are there. They're familiar with the social norms, the unwritten rules, the subtle hierarchies. They join the right clubs, attend the right events, make the connections that will matter decades later. They're not striving to prove themselves or to achieve social mobility through education. They're already at the top. Education is about maintaining and refining that position. There's often less anxiety about grades and performance than among middle-class or upwardly mobile students. A middle-class student knows their future opportunities depend significantly on their academic performance. They need good grades to get into graduate school, to secure the first job, to launch their career. An old money student faces no such pressure. Whether they excel academically or merely get by, their future is largely assured. This can lead to a certain casualness about academic achievement. Some old money students do work very hard and achieve at the highest levels, driven by personal ambition or family expectations. But others coast, putting in just enough effort to maintain acceptable standing, focusing their real energy on social life and extracurricular activities that build networks. The subjects old money students study are revealing too. You'll find many studying history, art history, classics, philosophy, subjects that provide cultural knowledge and intellectual development, but have no obvious career applications. You'll find fewer in accounting or computer science, or other vocational fields. The implicit understanding is that their education is for personal enrichment, not employment preparation. If they do study something practical like law or business, it's often to prepare for managing family affairs or to have credentials that provide legitimacy if they choose to work. not because they need those skills to earn a living. Graduate education follows similar patterns. Old money heirs who pursue graduate degrees often choose prestigious programs in fields like art history, anthropology, literature, subjects that carry cultural capital but limited earning potential. An MBA from Harvard Business School or a law degree from Yale serves partly as an educational credential, but also as a network-building opportunity and a social signal. The degree says I'm serious, I'm capable, I belong in leadership positions, even if the actual knowledge gained is never directly applied. Let's think about the concept of work in old money psychology. Work is optional in a way that's difficult for most people to fully comprehend. An old money heir can choose to work or not work based entirely on personal preference. If they work, they can pursue any field regardless of compensation. They can take risks that others can't afford, starting a business with high failure probability, pursuing creative fields with uncertain income, entering public service with modest salaries. This freedom is genuinely valuable and opens possibilities that most people can't access. But it also creates challenges. When you don't need to work, finding motivation to work can be difficult. Many old money heirs do work, but they face constant questions about whether they're doing it for the right reasons. Are you working to contribute something meaningful, or just to avoid the social stigma of not working? Are you genuinely talented in this field? Or did family connections get you the position? Would you persist through the difficult parts of this career if you actually needed the income? These questions can undermine confidence and create a sense that achievements aren't really earned. There's also the challenge of dealing with colleagues and competitors who do need their income. The dynamics become strange when you're working alongside people for whom this job is their livelihood, while for you it's essentially a hobby, however seriously pursued. You can walk away at any time. They can't. You can turn down promotions or transfers that would disrupt your personal life. They might not have that luxury. This creates subtle tensions and resentments that can make workplace relationships complicated. Some old money heirs resolve this by working in fields where their wealth is less obvious or relevant. Academia, for instance, or certain creative fields where everyone is assumed to be pursuing their passion rather than maximizing income. Others embrace family businesses or family office work where their position is explicitly tied to family ownership rather than individual merit. Still others work in fields like philanthropy or non-profit leadership where their wealth is actually an asset, providing credibility and connections that aid their work. Let your mind rest for a moment with these psychological complexities. Notice how being born into wealth solves certain problems: material security, educational opportunity, freedom from financial anxiety, while creating others: purpose, identity, authentic relationships, meaningful achievement. Neither situation is universally better or worse. They're simply different, with different challenges and different opportunities. Now let's explore how old money families handle the practical challenge of preparing the next generation to inherit wealth responsibly. This is where psychology meets strategy, where values must be transmitted along with assets, because wealth without wisdom is dangerous. History is full of examples of fortunes dissipated by heirs who received money, but not the training and values needed to preserve it. Many old money families begin financial education quite young, though they're careful about how much they reveal. Children might be given small allowances and taught to budget, to save, to give some portion to charity. They learn that money is a tool, not a toy, and that it comes with responsibilities. As they grow older, they might be given larger sums to manage under supervision, learning from mistakes while the stakes are relatively low. By the time they inherit significant wealth, they've had years or even decades of practice managing money in increasing amounts. Family meetings are common in many old money families, gatherings where financial matters are discussed openly across generations. Grandparents, parents, and adult children might meet quarterly or annually to review the family's overall financial position, discuss major decisions, review investment performance, plan for the future. These meetings serve multiple purposes. They educate younger generations about family finances. They create transparency that reduces suspicion and conflict. They allow collective decision-making that binds the family together. And they reinforce family identity and values across generations. Some families create more formal educational programs, weekend seminars where family members learn about investing, about taxes, about estate planning, internships at the family office where young people work alongside the professionals managing family wealth, mentorship relationships where older family members guide younger ones, study groups where family members read and discuss books about wealth management, family governance, or relevant topics. The goal is to ensure that by the time someone inherits significant wealth, they understand what they're inheriting and how to manage it. There's often explicit teaching about family history and values, stories about how the wealth was originally created, about ancestors who built the business or made key investments, stories about family members who used wealth well and those who squandered it. The lessons from these stories, about hard work, about prudence, about the dangers of extravagance, are passed down as oral tradition, reinforcing family culture. Many families create written histories, sometimes quite detailed, documenting the family story and explicitly articulating the values that should guide future generations. The transmission of values is perhaps even more important than the transmission of wealth management skills, because technical knowledge about investing can be hired. You can employ excellent financial advisors, but values can't be hired. Either the next generation shares the family's commitment to preservation and stewardship, or they don't. If they don't, no amount of trust structures or financial expertise will preserve the wealth across another generation. What values do old money families typically try to transmit? We've discussed some already. The importance of stewardship over consumption, of thinking generationally rather than personally, of giving back to society. But there are others. A suspicion of debt, even though leverage can be financially advantageous, because debt creates vulnerability. A preference for privacy, for keeping family financial matters confidential, for avoiding public attention. A sense that family comes first, that maintaining family cohesion and reputation matters more than individual desires. A commitment to excellence and achievement, not for financial reasons, but for personal dignity and family honour. There's often teaching about the responsibilities that come with wealth. You represent the family in public, so your behaviour reflects on everyone. You have resources that create power, so you must use that power ethically. You benefit from systems that advantage the wealthy, so you have an obligation to support reforms that create more fairness while preserving legitimate wealth. These aren't always articulated explicitly, but they're transmitted through example, through subtle approval and disapproval, through the stories families tell about themselves. Let's talk about the concept of the black sheep, the family member who rejects family values, who consumes rather than preserves, who brings scandal or embarrassment. Every large multi-generational family has them. How old money families handle these individuals reveals much about family dynamics and wealth preservation strategies. Often there's an initial period of trying to reform the black sheep. Family interventions, conditions placed on trust distributions, offers to pay for treatment or education if they'll change their behaviour. If this doesn't work, the family typically moves to containment, legal structures that limit how much wealth a problematic family member can access or damage. Trust provisions might give trustees discretion to withhold distributions if they believe funds will be misused. The black sheep might receive a fixed income but no control over principal. They might be excluded from family business leadership or foundation boards. In extreme cases, families might effectively sever ties, allowing the problematic member to go their own way with minimal support, protecting the rest of the family and the bulk of the wealth from their behaviour. This sounds harsh, but from the family's perspective, it's necessary. One person's dysfunction can't be allowed to destroy what's been built over generations or to drag down the entire family. It's a cold calculation, but it's part of wealth preservation. There's also the challenge of varied aptitudes and interests across family members. In any large family, some members will be financially sophisticated and interested in wealth management. Others won't be. Some will be responsible and prudent. Others will be impulsive or naive. Some will embrace family values and traditions. Others will rebel against them. How do you create structures that accommodate this diversity while preserving wealth? Many families solve this through differentiated roles. Those who are interested and capable take leadership positions, serving as trustees, sitting on foundation boards, working in family businesses or family offices. Those who aren't interested or capable receive income and support but don't have decision-making authority. This isn't always popular with those excluded from leadership, but it's pragmatic. Better to have competent people making decisions than to democratize authority and risk poor choices. Some families create multiple tiers of involvement, an inner circle of family members deeply engaged in wealth management and family governance. A middle tier who participate in family meetings and stay informed but don't have day-to-day responsibilities, and an outer tier who simply receive distributions from trusts without active involvement. People can move between tiers based on interest and demonstrated capability. This creates pathways for engagement without requiring everyone to be equally involved. Let's consider the special challenges that face families whose wealth is concentrated in a single operating business rather than diversified investments. Many great fortunes were built on businesses, railroads, oil, steel, retail, manufacturing. Some families have successfully transitioned from operating businesses to diversified investments. The Vanderbilts, for instance, moved from railroads to diversified holdings over generations. But other families maintain operating businesses for many decades, or even over a century. When the family wealth is the business, family dynamics and business decisions become hopelessly entangled. Should we sell to this acquisition offer or maintain family control? Should we hire the most qualified executive or give the position to a family member? Should we take the company public to access capital markets or remain private to preserve family authority? Should we pay large dividends to support family lifestyle or reinvest in the business for long-term growth? These questions pit family interests against each other and create conflicts that can tear families apart. Successful family businesses typically create strong governance structures that separate family from business as much as possible. Professional management handles daily operations. A board of directors, which might include family members but also independent directors, makes strategic decisions. Family members who work in the business are held to the same performance standards as non-family employees. Family meetings address family issues separately from business meetings. These boundaries help but never completely eliminate the tensions inherent in family business. There's also the succession challenge. When the founder runs the business, their authority is clear. But when the business must pass to the second generation, difficult questions arise. Does it go to the oldest child regardless of ability? Is it divided equally among all children, even if some aren't interested in or capable of running a business? Is it given to the most competent child, creating resentment among others? Does it go to sons but not daughters, following old patriarchal patterns? Different families answer these questions differently, and the answers can cause rifts that persist for generations. Many families have watched their businesses shrink or fail during succession transitions. The founder had vision, drive, and ability to build the business. The heirs might not. They might have been raised in wealth and lack the hunger that drove the founder. They might fight among themselves over control. They might make poor strategic decisions. They might sell to outside investors, converting the operating business into cash that then must be managed. This process, from operating business to passive wealth, has happened to countless families and represents both a risk and an opportunity. The risk is that business value might be destroyed during transition. The opportunity is that diversification might actually preserve wealth better than concentration in a single business. Think about the Mars family, which still owns Mars Candy Company after multiple generations, or the Cargill family, whose agricultural business remains private and family-controlled despite being one of the largest corporations in America, or the Walton family, heirs to the Walmart fortune, who maintain significant ownership despite the company being publicly traded. These families have managed to keep businesses in family hands across generations, preserving both wealth and family identity tied to those businesses. But there are exceptions. Most family businesses don't survive to the third generation under family control. Let yourself rest with these complexities for a moment. Notice how family dynamics, business decisions, wealth preservation, and individual psychology all interweave. Notice how difficult it is to balance competing interests between generations, between family members, between short-term needs and long-term preservation, between family cohesion and optimal financial decisions. Old money families that succeed in preserving wealth across generations must navigate all of these tensions simultaneously and continually. It's not easy, and many fail despite enormous resources and expert advice. Now let's talk about the role of advisors in old money families. Because no matter how sophisticated family members are, they can't possess all the expertise needed to manage great wealth across all its dimensions. Tax law, estate planning, investment management, risk management, legal structures, philanthropic strategy. Each requires specialized knowledge that takes years to develop. Old money families rely on teams of advisors, and the relationship with these advisors is crucial to wealth preservation. The family office, which we discussed earlier, employs some advisors directly. But families also work with outside professionals, attorneys, accountants, investment managers, insurance specialists, art advisors, and more. These relationships often span decades. The family's primary attorney might be the third generation of their law firm serving the fourth generation of the family. This continuity creates deep knowledge of family dynamics, preferences, and history that makes the advisor more effective. Old money families tend to be conservative about changing advisors. They value the long-term relationship, the accumulated knowledge, the proven trustworthiness. A new advisor might have brilliant ideas, but do they really understand this family's unique situation? Can they be trusted with confidential information? Will they still be around in 20 years? The tendency is to stick with known quantities, even if they're not necessarily the most cutting-edge or aggressive in their recommendations. The compensation structure for advisors often reflects old money priorities. Rather than paying based on investment performance, which creates incentives for excessive risk-taking, families often pay fixed fees or retainers. The advisor's job isn't to maximize returns, but to preserve capital, minimize taxes, ensure smooth wealth transfers, and maintain family harmony around financial matters. Different incentives create different behaviors. An advisor paid based on performance might recommend aggressive investments to boost returns. An advisor paid a flat fee to preserve wealth will recommend conservative, proven strategies. There's also a counseling function that advisors provide beyond technical expertise. Family members might discuss confidential matters with advisors that they wouldn't discuss with each other. Should I divorce? Should I cut off my irresponsible brother? Should I leave this business opportunity? Advisors who've worked with the family for decades become trusted confidants, providing perspective informed by deep knowledge of family history and dynamics. This counseling function is invaluable and helps explain why families maintain advisor relationships for so long. Advisors also serve as buffers between family members when conflicts arise. If siblings disagree about whether to sell a property, the advisor can provide objective analysis of the financial implications, shifting the conversation from emotional to rational grounds. If generations disagree about how much to distribute versus how much to save, the advisor can model out the long-term implications of different approaches. This doesn't eliminate family conflicts, but it provides structure and information that makes conflicts more manageable. Let's consider how old money families think about risk, because their approach is distinctive and crucial to wealth preservation. Most people think about risk in terms of losing money on investments. Old money thinks about risk more broadly, as anything that could threaten the family's wealth, position, or continuity across generations. Investment risk is managed through extreme diversification, as we've discussed, and through conservative overall positioning. But families also worry about legal risk, lawsuits that could penetrate their wealth. They worry about political risk, governments that might expropriate assets or drastically increase taxes. They worry about reputation risk, scandals that could damage family standing and create problems in business or social relationships. They worry about family risk, divorces, substance abuse, mental illness, conflicts that could fragment the family and dissipate wealth. Each category of risk requires different management approaches. Legal risk is managed through careful structuring. Assets are held in multiple entities across different jurisdictions, so that a successful lawsuit against one entity can't reach assets in others. Comprehensive insurance covers various liability exposures. Sophisticated estate planning ensures that wealth transfers according to family wishes even if challenged. Prenuptial agreements protect against wealth leaving the family through divorce. These aren't paranoid measures. They're prudent protections developed over generations of experience with various threats to wealth. Political risk is managed through geographic diversification, as we've discussed, but also through political engagement. Old money families often maintain connections to political leaders across the spectrum, through philanthropy, through social relationships, through direct political contributions. The goal isn't to control government, but to ensure that family interests are considered when policies are made, and that the family has relationships they can leverage if political situations threaten their wealth. It's a subtle form of power that most people never see, but that's crucial to preserving wealth across political changes. Reputation risk is managed through privacy and through careful control of public perception. Old money families generally avoid publicity. They don't go on reality shows or give interviews about their wealth. They contribute to respectable causes, serve on prestigious boards, maintain impeccable social behaviour, all to preserve a reputation as responsible, benevolent stewards of wealth rather than as frivolous consumers or selfish hoarders. When scandals do occur, they're managed through lawyers, PR professionals, and sometimes philanthropic gestures designed to rebuild reputation. Family risk might be the most challenging because it's the most personal and least subject to external management. Families try to instill values that reduce conflict. They create structures that limit damage from individual poor choices. They provide support for family members struggling with addiction or mental health issues. They mediate conflicts before they escalate. But ultimately, families are collections of individuals with their own desires, flaws, and conflicts. Perfect harmony is impossible. The goal is to create enough cohesion and enough structural protection that normal human dysfunction doesn't destroy the wealth. Let's think about how old money families view the broader society and their place in it. There's often a sense of being custodians not just of family wealth, but of social institutions and values. They see themselves as supporting the museums, universities, hospitals, symphonies, and other institutions that make civilization civilized. They view their wealth as enabling contributions that benefit everyone, not just themselves. This isn't entirely self-serving rationalization. These families do support important institutions with their philanthropy. But it's also a way of justifying wealth inequality, of arguing that concentration of wealth in their hands serves the common good. There's sometimes an aristocratic sensibility, a belief that society benefits from having a class of people who don't need to work for money, and can therefore dedicate themselves to public service, to arts patronage, to thoughtful philanthropy, to long-term thinking unconstrained by market pressures. This view sees old money families as playing a role similar to the aristocracy in pre-democratic societies, providing leadership, supporting culture, maintaining standards. Whether this self-conception is accurate or self-flattering is debatable, but it influences how these families see themselves and their role in society. Many old money families have a conservative political orientation, though not always in the partisan sense. They tend to value tradition, stability, incremental change over revolutionary disruption. They benefit from the current system and are naturally suspicious of radical reforms that might threaten their position. They might support liberal causes around civil rights or environmental protection, but they're likely to oppose policies like wealth taxes or dramatic increases in estate taxes that would directly erode family wealth. Their politics are shaped by their economic interests, as everyone's are, but those interests align with preserving the status quo more than transforming it. At the same time, some old money families are quite progressive, recognizing that extreme inequality is socially destabilizing and that reforms creating more fairness actually protect their long-term interests by reducing social tensions. Warren Buffett and Bill Gates, though technically new money, exemplify this perspective, arguing that estate taxes should be higher, that the wealthy should pay more in taxes, that extreme wealth concentration is problematic. Some old money families share this view, supporting redistributive policies even when those policies reduce their own wealth, believing that a more just society is worth the personal cost. As we reach the end of this exploration of old money psychology, let yourself absorb what we've discussed. Notice how being born into wealth creates a unique psychological situation. Freedom from financial anxiety, but challenges around purpose and identity, advantages in education and opportunity, but difficulties forming authentic relationships, power and privilege, but also scrutiny and expectations. Notice how families try to transmit values along with wealth, how they structure relationships with advisors, how they think about risk in multidimensional ways, how they see themselves in relation to broader society. All of this combines to create the distinctive psychology of old money, different from how most people think about wealth, oriented toward preservation across generations, shaped by position at the top of social and economic hierarchies. Let these ideas settle in your mind as we prepare to move forward, exploring in our next section how specific families have maintained or lost their wealth, and what lessons their experiences teach us about the fragility and resilience of multi-generational fortunes. Let's turn now to examining specific families and their stories, because the abstract principles we've discussed become clearer when we see how they've played out in actual lives across generations. We'll look at families who've preserved wealth successfully and those who haven't, understanding what distinguished their paths and what lessons emerge from their different outcomes. The Rockefeller family offers perhaps the most instructive example of successful multi-generational wealth preservation in American history. John D. Rockefeller, the patriarch, built what was arguably the greatest American fortune of the 19th century through Standard Oil. At his peak, his wealth represented about 1.5% of total American economic output, which would translate to roughly $400 billion in today's terms. He died in 1937, and we're now in the 7th generation of Rockefellers. The family is still wealthy, still influential, still engaged in philanthropy and public service. How did they do it? The first crucial decision was made by John D. Rockefeller himself. Despite building his fortune through business, he began giving it away systematically during his lifetime. He established the Rockefeller Foundation in 1913 with an initial endowment of $100 million, an enormous sum at the time. He created the University of Chicago, funded medical research that led to vaccines and treatments still used today, supported education throughout the American South. By the time he died, he'd given away about $550 million, most of his fortune. This wasn't just generosity, it was strategic. By moving wealth into foundations, he ensured it would continue serving family purposes across generations, while gaining tax advantages and protecting assets from various risks. The second crucial decision was structural. Rockefeller's son, John D. Rockefeller Jr., established an office to manage family affairs. This eventually became what we now recognize as a family office, one of the first in America. The office employed professional managers, accountants, lawyers, and investment advisors whose sole job was preserving and growing Rockefeller wealth. This professionalized wealth management, removing it from the purely personal realm and creating institutional continuity. The third crucial decision was about values. The Rockefeller family developed a strong culture of public service. Multiple generations have gone into politics, philanthropy, environmental conservation, and other fields where they could use family resources and connections for public benefit. Nelson Rockefeller became vice president. Winthrop Rockefeller was governor of Arkansas. David Rockefeller led Chase Manhattan Bank and was a major figure in international affairs. These weren't people just living off inherited wealth. They were actively engaged in business, politics, and philanthropy, giving family members purpose and maintaining the family's social capital and political connections. The fourth crucial decision was about family governance. The Rockefellers created structures for making collective decisions, for educating younger generations, for maintaining family cohesion even as the family grew to include hundreds of descendants. Family meetings, family councils, explicit discussion of values and expectations, these became institutionalized. The family didn't just happen. It was deliberately maintained as a coherent entity across generations. The result is that 7 generations after the fortune was built, Rockefeller descendants are still wealthy, though the wealth is now dispersed among many individuals and institutions. No single Rockefeller today has the relative wealth that John D. Rockefeller had. But collectively, the family remains influential and well-resourced. They've successfully navigated the challenge of preserving wealth across time, while also allowing it to serve broader purposes. It's a remarkable achievement. Now consider the Vanderbilt family, whose trajectory was quite different. Cornelius Vanderbilt, called the Commodore, built a fortune in railroads and shipping in the mid-1800s. At his death in 1877, he was the wealthiest man in America, with a fortune of about $100 million, perhaps 2% of American GDP at the time. He left the bulk of his wealth to one son, William, who doubled it within a decade. The Vanderbilts built magnificent mansions, collected art, lived spectacularly well. They were the epitome of Gilded Age wealth and extravagance. But by 1973, when 120 Vanderbilt descendants gathered for a family reunion, not one was a millionaire. In 3 generations, one of America's greatest fortunes had essentially disappeared. What happened? The most obvious problem was consumption. The Vanderbilts built and maintained homes that were extraordinarily expensive to operate. The Breakers in Newport, Biltmore Estate in North Carolina, multiple mansions in New York City. These weren't just expensive to build. They required armies of servants, constant maintenance, enormous operating costs. They were displays of wealth. But they were also engines destroying wealth. Each generation inherited these properties and the expectation of maintaining them while also living at the same level of luxury as the previous generation. There was also the problem of division. Unlike Cornelius, who concentrated his wealth in one son, subsequent generations divided inheritances among multiple children. This is generous and fair-minded, but it fragments wealth. If you have 4 children and divide your wealth equally, each receives 1/4. If each of them has 4 children and divides equally, each grandchild receives 1/16 of the original fortune. After a few generations of equal division among multiple children, even a vast fortune becomes modest when divided among dozens or hundreds of descendants. The Vanderbilts also failed to maintain their wealth in productive assets. They sold the businesses that generated the original fortune, converting productive capital into cash and then into consumption. The railroads were sold. The shipping companies were sold. The money was invested in things that didn't generate returns, the mansions, the art collections, the lavish lifestyles. Or it was invested poorly, lost in bad business ventures and market crashes. There was no family office providing professional management, no structures preventing impulsive decisions, no culture of stewardship over consumption. Family values also played a role. The Vanderbilts saw wealth as something to enjoy, not something to preserve for future generations. They lived magnificently, through legendary parties, collected art and horses and yachts. This might have been sustainable if the fortune had been larger or if they'd maintained income-generating assets, but combined with division and poor investment, consumption destroyed what had seemed like unlimited wealth. The contrast between the Rockefellers and Vanderbilts is instructive. Both families started with comparable fortunes in the same era. One preserved wealth for 7 generations and counting. The other saw it disappear within 3. The difference wasn't luck or intelligence. It was choices about consumption versus preservation, about structure and professionalization, about values and family culture, about maintaining productive assets versus converting them to consumption. Let's consider the Rothschild family, whose wealth preservation across even more generations offers additional lessons. The Rothschild banking dynasty began with Meyer Amschel Rothschild in Frankfurt in the late 1700s. He sent his 5 sons to 5 European cities, Frankfurt, Vienna, London, Naples and Paris, to establish banking operations. This created a multinational financial network that financed governments, facilitated international trade, and accumulated enormous wealth. The Rothschilds are now in their 7th or 8th generation, depending on which family branch you're counting, and they remain wealthy and influential, particularly the British and French branches. What accounts for their longevity? Several factors stand out. First, they maintain their core business for generations. The Rothschild banks continued operating, providing steady income and growing capital. Unlike the Vanderbilts, who sold their businesses, the Rothschilds stayed in banking for over 2 centuries. Even today, Rothschild investment banks operate in multiple countries, still bearing the family name and providing both income and family identity. Second, they practice strategic intermarriage within the family and within their social class. First cousins marrying was common in the 19th century Rothschild family, keeping wealth consolidated rather than dispersed. When they married outside the immediate family, they married into other banking and aristocratic families, creating alliances and maintaining shared values. This sounds strange to modern sensibilities, but it was effective at preventing wealth from fragmenting or leaving family control. Third, they were politically astute. The Rothschilds cultivated relationships with governments across Europe, making themselves indispensable to state finances. They financed wars, arranged international loans, managed government debt. This gave them political protection and business opportunities. They also diversified geographically in a way that protected them when individual countries' political situations deteriorated. When the Nazis came to power in Germany and Austria, the Rothschilds lost significant assets in those countries, but their British and French operations survived. Fourth, they adapted to changing times. When traditional banking became less profitable in the 20th century, the family diversified into investment banking, wealth management, wine production, and other ventures. They didn't cling rigidly to old business models, but evolved while maintaining core identity around finance and family name. Fifth, they were extraordinarily private. The Rothschilds avoided publicity, rarely gave interviews, didn't flaunt wealth publicly. This privacy protected them from scrutiny, from envy, from becoming targets. It also spawned conspiracy theories. The secretive, powerful banking family became a subject of anti-Semitic myths and wild speculation about their influence and wealth. But the privacy nevertheless served protective purposes, allowing them to operate with less public attention than more visible wealthy families received. The Rothschild story shows that maintaining an operating business, practicing strategic marriage, cultivating political connections, adapting to change, and maintaining privacy all contribute to multi-generational wealth preservation. It also shows the role of geographic distribution in protecting wealth from political risk, a lesson learned through painful experience when Nazi Germany confiscated Austrian Rothschild assets. Now let's look at a different kind of example, the DuPont family. The DuPonts built their fortune on gunpowder and later chemicals, founding the company that became DuPont. The business was started in 1802 and remained family-controlled for nearly 2 centuries. The family became one of the wealthiest in America, and descendants remain wealthy today, now in the 7th or 8th generation. What's particularly interesting about the DuPonts is their geographic concentration. Unlike the Rothschilds, who spread across Europe, the DuPonts concentrated in Delaware, where their business was headquartered. They essentially owned Delaware in both economic and political terms for much of the 19th and early 20th centuries. Family members served as governors, senators, representatives. They owned vast estates, employed large portions of the state's population, influenced everything from education to infrastructure. This concentration created both advantages and risks. The advantage was concentrated political power in a single jurisdiction, allowing the family to shape laws and policies in ways that protected their interests. Delaware's famously business-friendly incorporation laws, which made it the preferred state for companies to incorporate in, were influenced by DuPont interests. The family could operate with less external constraint than they would have faced if their power was more dispersed. The risk was vulnerability to changes in Delaware's political environment or in the chemical industry. If Delaware had turned against business interests, or if the chemical industry had collapsed, the DuPont wealth would have been more vulnerable than more diversified fortunes. In practice, these risks didn't materialize, but they could have. The DuPont example shows that concentrated power in a single geographic area can work, but it's a different strategy than the geographic diversification that other old money families pursue. The DuPonts also demonstrated another important principle, the value of keeping the operating business in family hands. DuPont Company remained family-controlled until the late 20th century, providing both income and family identity. Family members worked in the business, often in leadership positions. This gave them purpose and ensured that at least some family members understood business and finance deeply. When the company was finally split up and sold in the early 21st century, the wealth was converted to diversified investments. But by then, the family had centuries of experience managing wealth and strong institutional structures in place. Let's consider the Mars family, makers of Mars candy bars, M&Ms, and many other products. This is a more recent fortune, built in the 20th century rather than the 19th, but it offers lessons about successful business preservation across generations. The company was started in 1911 and remains family-owned today, one of the largest private companies in America. The family is extraordinarily private. They rarely give interviews, don't appear on lists of the wealthy because their finances are private, and maintain almost complete obscurity despite controlling a business that generates tens of billions in annual revenue. The Mars family's approach to wealth preservation is ruthlessly focused. They've kept the business private, refusing offers to go public that would have made individual family members spectacularly wealthy, but would have diluted family control. They've reinvested profits in the business rather than taking large dividends for consumption. They've maintained a culture of frugality and hard work. Family members who work in the business are expected to perform, not to coast on family name. They've avoided publicity and maintained privacy to a degree rare among the wealthy. The result is that 3 generations after the founder, the Mars family controls one of America's largest fortunes, estimated in the range of $100 billion or more collectively. They've done this by making the opposite choice from the Vanderbilts, maintaining and growing the operating business rather than selling it and consuming the proceeds. They've resisted the temptation to cash out, instead viewing the business as a multi-generational asset to be passed on to future family members. The Mars example shows that staying in business, maintaining privacy, reinvesting rather than consuming, and requiring family members to actually work can preserve wealth across generations. It's not exciting or glamorous. The Mars family doesn't appear in society pages or build spectacular mansions, but they've built and preserved a fortune that rivals or exceeds more famous old money families. Now let's examine a cautionary tale, the Hartford family, heirs to the A&P grocery fortune. Huntington Hartford inherited wealth from the Great Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company, which was the Walmart of its era, the largest grocery chain in America. He inherited his fortune in the 1950s and proceeded to lose almost all of it within his lifetime. How? Hartford wanted to be a patron of the arts, a man of culture and sophistication. He bought an entire island in the Bahamas and developed it as a luxury resort. He opened a museum in New York City to showcase art that he personally enjoyed but that critics dismissed. He invested in Broadway shows that lost money. He married and divorced multiple times with expensive settlements each time. He lived lavishly, spending millions on consumption while his investments consistently lost money. The A&P company itself eventually failed, but that's almost irrelevant to Hartford's personal wealth destruction. He converted his shares to cash and spent the money faster than it could generate returns. He made investment decisions based on personal whims rather than financial analysis. He had no structures limiting his spending, no advisors he listened to, no family governance creating accountability. He lived exactly as he pleased, and by the time he was elderly he'd burned through hundreds of millions of dollars and died relatively poor. The Hartford story illustrates what happens when wealth meets lack of discipline. He didn't lack intelligence or education. He'd attended Harvard. He wasn't malicious or criminal. He simply spent money on things he enjoyed without concern for preservation. He represents the nightmare scenario that old money families work hard to prevent, the heir who dissipates in one lifetime what took generations to build. Let's think about the Kennedy family, because they offer an interesting example of wealth used strategically for political power. Joseph P. Kennedy Sr. made a fortune through various businesses in the 1920s and 30s: banking, stock market speculation, Hollywood, liquor distribution. The source of some of this wealth was questionable, and there were rumors of bootlegging during Prohibition, though nothing was ever proven. Regardless, by the 1940s, Kennedy had accumulated substantial wealth. Rather than focusing on preserving and growing this wealth indefinitely, Kennedy used it for a different purpose, launching his sons into political careers. He financed John F. Kennedy's campaigns for Congress, for Senate, for President. He did the same for Robert Kennedy, and would have done the same for Edward Kennedy. The wealth was a tool for achieving political power, not an end in itself. This strategy worked brilliantly in one sense. John became president, Robert became attorney general and a senator. Edward was a senator for decades. The Kennedy name became synonymous with American political aristocracy, but it also meant the wealth was partially consumed rather than preserved. Campaign financing, maintaining multiple estates, supporting a large extended family, all of this cost money. The fortune wasn't managed with the same preservation focus that the Rockefellers brought to their wealth. The result is that Kennedy descendants today are wealthy, but not spectacularly so compared to families that focused on wealth preservation. They have substantial assets, yes, but nothing like what they'd have if the fortune had been managed primarily for growth and preservation. Instead, they have something else: a political legacy, name recognition, continued influence in American public life. Whether this trade-off was worthwhile depends on what you value. If the goal was political power and public service, the Kennedy approach was brilliantly successful. If the goal was multi-generational wealth preservation, other strategies would have been more effective. The Kennedy example shows that wealth can serve different purposes. It can be preserved across generations as an end in itself, or it can be used strategically to achieve other goals: political power, social change, cultural patronage. Neither approach is inherently superior, they just reflect different values and priorities. Now let's consider the Getty family, because their story involves both spectacular wealth and spectacular dysfunction, offering lessons about what can go wrong even when wealth is substantial. J. Paul Getty built a fortune in oil and was considered the richest man in the world when he died in 1976. But his personal life and family relationships were troubled. He married and divorced 5 times. His relationship with his children was distant and often hostile. He was famously cheap despite his billions. There's a famous story about him installing a payphone in his mansion, for guests to use rather, then letting them make free calls. When Getty's grandson was kidnapped in Italy in 1973, the kidnappers demanded $17 million in ransom. Getty initially refused to pay, reportedly saying it would encourage other kidnappers to target his other grandchildren. Eventually, after the kidnappers cut off the grandson's ear and sent it to a newspaper, Getty negotiated the ransom down to about $3 million and paid it. But he loaned the money to his son at 4% interest rather than giving it. This story, whether completely accurate or somewhat embellished, captures something about Getty's relationship with wealth and family. Wealth took priority over familial bonds. Getty's will divided his fortune in complicated ways, with most going to the Getty Museum but substantial amounts to various family members through trusts. But he didn't leave a culture of cohesion or shared values. The family has been marked by addiction, mental illness, suicide, and conflict. Gordon Getty, one of the sons, became a successful composer and philanthropist, managing his portion of wealth reasonably well. But other family members have struggled. The extreme wealth didn't protect them from personal demons and didn't create the family cohesion that characterizes successful multi-generational wealth preservation. The Getty story shows that wealth alone isn't enough. The psychological damage from dysfunctional family relationships, from emotional neglect, from being raised in an atmosphere where money seemed to matter more than people, this damage can undermine wealth's benefits. The Gettys remain wealthy, yes, but they haven't achieved the dynastic success that their level of resources might have enabled. Family culture and psychological health matter as much as financial resources in determining whether wealth serves positive purposes across generations. Let's turn to the Pritzker family of Chicago, because they offer a more positive example of a 20th century fortune successfully navigated through multiple generations. The Pritzkers made their money through the Hyatt hotel chain and various other investments. The family stayed tightly controlled and private for decades, operating through trusts that kept wealth consolidated and out of public view. Family members worked in family businesses, married strategically, maintained privacy, and followed the classic old money playbook. This worked well for several generations. The family wealth grew substantially. They became major philanthropists in Chicago, supporting medical research, education, and the arts. Family members held positions of influence in business and politics. It seemed like a textbook example of successful wealth preservation. But in the early 2000s, the family structure began to fracture. 11 of the 13 grandchildren of the family patriarch filed suit to break up the family trusts, arguing they were being unfairly restricted from accessing wealth and that the trust structure was benefiting some family members more than others. The lawsuit was eventually settled, with the trusts being partially dissolved and wealth being distributed more directly to individual family members. This represents a common challenge in multi-generational wealth, maintaining family unity as the family grows and becomes more diverse in values and interests. The structures that preserved wealth for earlier generations can feel restrictive and unfair to later generations. Some family members want more control over quote, _5 wealth. Others want to use money in ways that family governance structures prohibit. The tension between individual autonomy and collective preservation is difficult to manage. The Pritzker settlement didn't destroy the family wealth. They're still extremely wealthy. But it marked a transition from highly consolidated family control to more individual autonomy. Whether this will affect long-term preservation remains to be seen. It's a reminder that even successful wealth preservation strategies face challenges as families evolve and as generational values shift. Think for a moment about all these different families and their different trajectories. The Rockefellers succeeding through institutionalization and philanthropy. The Vanderbilts failing through consumption and division. The Rothschilds succeeding through geographic diversity and maintaining their business. the DuPonts succeeding through concentrated regional power and business continuity, the Mars family succeeding through privacy and reinvestment, the Hartfords failing through lack of discipline, the Kennedys trading wealth for political power, the Gettys struggling despite wealth because of family dysfunction, the Pritzkers succeeding but then fragmenting as family unity weakened. What patterns emerge from these stories? What principles seem to distinguish success from failure? Let's draw some conclusions from these family histories. First, maintaining or recreating productive assets matters more than simply holding passive wealth. The families who kept businesses running, Rothschilds, DuPonts, Mars, preserved wealth better than those who sold businesses and lived on the proceeds. Passive investments can work, but active businesses that generate continuous income and growth seem to have advantages for very long-term preservation. Second, family culture and values matter as much as financial strategies. The Rockefellers developed a strong culture of public service and stewardship. The Mars family developed a culture of privacy and hard work. The Vanderbilts developed a culture of consumption and display. Culture drove behavior, and behavior determined outcomes. Third, structure and professionalization protect against individual weaknesses. The families with family offices, with trusts limiting access to capital, with governance structures creating accountability, these families were more resilient when individual members made poor choices. The families without these structures were more vulnerable to the weaknesses of individual heirs. Fourth, privacy and discretion help preserve wealth by reducing scrutiny, envy, and targeting. The Mars family's obscurity has served them well. The Rothschilds' discretion has protected them. Families that courted publicity or lived ostentatiously often faced more challenges. Fifth, geographic and asset diversification protects against catastrophic loss. The Rothschilds spreading across Europe meant that problems in one country didn't destroy the whole family. Modern old money families continue this principle, spreading wealth across countries and asset classes to reduce concentrated risk. Sixth, the transition from operating business to passive wealth is dangerous. Many families have lost wealth during this transition. Selling the business that generated the fortune and trying to preserve the proceeds through investment is harder than just keeping the business and letting it continue generating wealth. But sometimes this transition is necessary because subsequent generations don't have the skills or interest to run the business, or because market conditions make selling optimal. Managing this transition successfully requires exceptional care and planning. Seventh, family size and the choice between concentration and division matters enormously. Large families that divide wealth equally among many descendants will see individual shares shrink each generation. Some families solve this through primogeniture, leaving everything to the eldest son, but this creates resentment and conflict among other family members. Others solve it through family-controlled trusts that don't distribute wealth directly, but provide for all family members while keeping the capital base intact. There's no perfect solution, but the challenge must be addressed explicitly. Eighth, adapting to changing times while maintaining core values is crucial. The families that preserved wealth across multiple centuries did so by evolving their businesses and strategies while keeping certain principles constant. Pure rigidity doesn't work because economic conditions change, tax laws change, business opportunities change. Pure flexibility doesn't work either because without core principles, wealth dissipates. Successful families found balance between tradition and adaptation. Let yourself absorb these lessons. Notice how concrete they are, how they emerge from actual family experiences rather than abstract theory. Notice how success required multiple factors aligning, structure and culture and strategy and sometimes luck. Notice how failure could result from single weaknesses, consumption, division, lack of discipline, family conflict, even when other factors were favorable. Preserving wealth across generations is difficult, requiring sustained effort and vigilance and the alignment of many factors. Most families fail at it. Those who succeed do so through conscious effort implementing principles that we can now identify and understand. As we move forward to our next section, we'll explore how these principles translate to practices, how old money families actually structure their daily lives, their financial affairs, their family relationships to embody the values and strategies that preserve wealth. We'll get practical and specific, looking at the actual mechanics of how multi-generational wealth is maintained day by day, year by year, generation after generation. Let's turn now to the practical daily reality of how old money families actually live, because understanding the abstract principles is one thing, but seeing how those principles manifest in actual behaviour, in choices made every day, brings them into clearer focus. We'll explore everything from how they dress to how they educate their children to how they spend their time, because these details reveal the culture that sustains wealth across generations. Start with something as simple as clothing. Old money dresses in a distinctive way that's immediately recognisable to those who know what to look for, though often invisible to those who don't. The principle is quality over trendiness, classic over fashionable, understated over attention-seeking. An old money man might wear the same style of suit for decades, well-tailored, made from excellent fabric, maintained carefully but not cutting-edge fashion. The suit might have been purchased 20 years ago, but it doesn't look dated because classic styles don't date. He'll have his shirts custom made, but in simple white or blue, no bold patterns or colours. His shoes will be well-made leather, probably English or Italian, resoled multiple times because quality shoes last for decades if properly maintained. Old money women follow similar principles: classic dresses and suits, excellent fabrics, perfect tailoring, minimal jewellery. A string of pearls, yes. Probably inherited from a grandmother, a simple gold bracelet or watch, but not large diamonds or flashy pieces that scream, "Look at my wealth." The overall effect is elegant, put together, expensive if you know what to look for, but not ostentatious. There's a deliberate effort to blend in with others of the same social class while distinguishing oneself from those trying to appear wealthy through conspicuous consumption. This approach to clothing serves multiple purposes. It's economical in the long run. Buying quality items that last for decades is cheaper than constantly replacing trendy pieces. It signals class membership to others who recognise the codes, the particular brands, the way things are worn, the subtle markers of quality. It demonstrates values around thrift and practicality despite wealth, and it avoids the vulgarity of trying too hard, of wearing wealth too obviously. New money might wear a brand new designer outfit covered in logos. Old money might wear a 20-year-old blazer that cost more when it was made than the entire designer outfit costs now. But you'd never know unless you were an expert in fabric and tailoring. The same principles apply to cars. Old money doesn't typically drive flashy sports cars or brand new luxury vehicles every year. They drive reliable, well-made cars that last for years. A Volvo station wagon, maintained meticulously, driven for 15 years. A classic Mercedes or BMW, bought used and kept running through excellent maintenance. Or if they do buy luxury cars, they keep them for many years. The car is transportation, not a status symbol. Buying a new car every year or two is viewed as wasteful, as trying too hard to impress people. There are exceptions, of course. Some old money families have collections of classic cars, but these are viewed as investments or as family heirlooms, not as consumption. A vintage Porsche or Ferrari kept in pristine condition, occasionally driven, perhaps appreciating in value. This is different from buying the newest sports car to be seen in. The distinction might seem subtle, but it's important to old money culture. One represents stewardship of valuable objects. The other represents consumption and display. Housing follows the same pattern. Old money families often live in homes that have been in the family for generations. These might be substantial properties, estates, large houses in expensive neighbourhoods, but they're not necessarily showy. The house might be impressive, but in a traditional, understated way. It won't have the latest smart home technology or the most contemporary design. It will have good bones, classic architecture, well maintained but not constantly renovated to follow trends. The furniture will be quality pieces, many of them antiques, some inherited. The overall effect is comfortable, tasteful, lived in. This is a family home, not a showplace. Some old money families do maintain multiple properties, a primary residence, a summer home, perhaps a ski lodge or beach house. But these are viewed as family assets, used by multiple generations, not personal luxuries. The summer home on Nantucket or in the Hamptons or in Maine has been in the family for 3 generations. Everyone goes there in summer. It's part of family tradition and identity. This is different from buying a vacation property to show off or for investment. The family property serves to bind generations together through shared experiences in shared spaces. The maintenance of these properties requires significant resources. But old money approaches this practically. They maintain properties meticulously because proper maintenance preserves value. They make necessary repairs immediately rather than deferring them. They hire competent staff to manage properties, caretakers, groundskeepers, housekeepers, often employing the same families for generations. But they don't renovate constantly or update just to have the latest finishes. The kitchen might have appliances from 15 years ago that still work perfectly well. The bathrooms might have classic fixtures rather than trendy new designs. Unless something is broken or genuinely needs updating, it's left alone. Let's talk about domestic staff, because this reveals much about old money culture. Many old money families do employ household help, housekeepers, cooks, nannies, gardeners, drivers. But the relationships with these employees are often long-term and somewhat familial, very different from the transactional relationships that new money might have with service workers. The housekeeper might have worked for the family for 30 years, knew the children when they were babies, knows all the family routines and preferences. She's treated with respect, paid fairly, given loyalty in return for her loyalty. There's an element of noblesse oblige in how old money treats employees. You take care of people who work for you, you don't exploit them. When the long-time gardener gets old, you keep him on in some capacity or provide for his retirement. When the nanny's daughter needs help with college costs, you provide it. This isn't pure altruism, it's about maintaining relationships, about dignity, about the social compact that comes with position and wealth. But it's also genuine. These are real relationships built over years or decades, not just economic transactions. The treatment of staff also signals values to children. Growing up with household employees who are treated with respect, who are part of the household fabric, teaches certain lessons. You learn that people in service roles are worthy of dignity and consideration. You learn that wealth comes with responsibilities to others. You learn how to interact with people across class lines, something that's increasingly rare in modern stratified society. Whether this fully compensates for the inequality inherent in the employer-employee relationship is debatable, but it's different from never interacting with people outside your social class or treating service workers as invisible. Now let's consider how old money families spend their time, because this reveals priorities and values. Work, as we've discussed, is often optional but still common. Those who do work tend to have particular kinds of careers. Some go into business, often family business or finance, using their education and connections to succeed in fields where they are already advantaged. Others go into fields that carry prestige but not necessarily high income: academia, diplomacy, museum curation, non-profit leadership. The career is about identity and contribution more than income. Leisure activities also follow patterns. Old money tends toward activities that are traditional, that carry class markers, that build social capital within their community. Sailing, tennis, golf, horseback riding, skiing. These are the classic old money sports. They're expensive to pursue seriously, which makes them partly exclusive to the wealthy. They're often done at private clubs that themselves serve as social gatekeepers. And they're activities where you can't buy your way to competence. You have to develop skill over time, often starting in childhood. The private club is itself a crucial institution in old money life. Country clubs, yacht clubs, city clubs, these are places where the wealthy socialize with their peers, where business is conducted informally, where children meet other children from similar backgrounds. Membership is often by invitation and requires recommendations from existing members. This creates exclusivity not just based on money but on social acceptance. You can be wealthy enough to afford membership but still not be invited if you're not the right kind of wealthy or don't have the right connections or background. These clubs serve multiple functions. They provide venues for recreation and socializing. They act as matchmaking grounds where young people from appropriate families meet. They facilitate business relationships in informal settings. They maintain social boundaries, keeping the old money community somewhat separate from new money and the middle class. And they transmit culture and values across generations. Children who grow up going to the club absorb norms and behaviors and networks that will serve them throughout their lives. Old money also tends to vacation in particular places that have been fashionable among the wealthy for generations. Nantucket, Martha's Vineyard, the Hamptons in summer, Aspen or Sun Valley for skiing in winter, Europe for cultural tourism, but specific parts of Europe, Paris, London, the Italian lakes, the south of France. These aren't necessarily the most exotic or exclusive destinations in the world. They're where old money has always gone, where they have family properties or connections, where they'll encounter others from their social set. There's a certain conservatism in all of this, doing things the way they've always been done, going places the family has always gone, maintaining traditions. This might seem boring or uncreative to outsiders, but it serves important functions. Tradition creates continuity across generations. When you summer where your parents and grandparents summered, you're maintaining family identity and connection. When you engage in activities that your social class has always valued, you're reinforcing your membership in that community. Tradition is the social glue that helps families and social classes maintain coherence across time. Let's talk about education in more practical detail, because this is where old money families invest heavily and thoughtfully. The goal is to ensure children attend the right schools, which means the schools that other old money children attend. This starts early. Private elementary schools, often day schools in major cities or boarding schools for older children. These schools are expensive. Tuition might be $40,000 or $50,000 per year or more. But old money families pay it without hesitation because education is viewed as crucial. The boarding school experience is particularly important in old money culture. Schools like Phillips Exeter, Phillips Andover, Choate, St. Paul's, Groton. These have educated the American elite for generations. Children typically attend starting around age 14 or 15, living at school rather than at home. This might seem harsh, sending children away at that age, but it's viewed as character building and as essential preparation for elite college and for adult life. What are children learning at these schools beyond the formal academic curriculum? They're learning to live away from home, to be independent, to navigate institutional environments. They're forming deep friendships with peers from similar backgrounds that will last throughout their lives. They're being challenged academically in ways that will prepare them for elite universities. They're participating in sports and activities that build the physical and social skills valued in their class. They're absorbing values around achievement, service, leadership. And they're making connections that will prove valuable in college, in career, in social life. The schools themselves are conscious of this role. They explicitly seek to develop leadership and character, not just academic knowledge. They have strong alumni networks that provide mentorship and opportunities. They have traditions and rituals that create shared identity. A graduate of Exeter or Andover carries that credential for life. And it opens doors and signals membership in a particular community. After boarding school comes college, and here the pattern continues. The Ivy League universities, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and the others, along with a few other elite schools like Stanford, MIT, Duke. Old money children are significantly more likely to attend these schools than similarly qualified students from other backgrounds. Partly because they're legacy admissions, children of alumni get preference, and partly because they've been groomed for admission through attendance at the right preparatory schools, through activities and achievements that admissions officers value, through coaching and support that less privileged students don't receive. At these universities, old money students continue building networks, making connections that will last throughout their lives. They join the right clubs and organizations, final clubs at Harvard, secret societies at Yale. These institutions within institutions further concentrate the elite, creating even more exclusive networks within already exclusive universities. A student who attended Exeter, went to Yale and joined Skull and Bones has accumulated layers of credentials and connections that will follow them throughout life. The academic experience itself might be secondary to these other functions. Old money students might study hard and achieve academic excellence, or they might coast and focus on social activities. Either way, they'll graduate with degrees from prestigious institutions and with networks that ensure opportunities. The degree is valuable, but the network might be even more valuable. The roommate who becomes an investment banker and can provide financial advice. The classmate who goes into politics and can facilitate introductions to policymakers. The friend whose family has business connections in a particular industry. These relationships, built over years of shared experience at elite institutions, become part of the infrastructure that supports old money families. Graduate education, if pursued, follows similar patterns. Business school at Harvard or Wharton, law school at Yale or Stanford, medical school at Johns Hopkins or UCSF. These aren't just excellent educational institutions. They're continuation of the sorting and networking that began in childhood. By the time someone has completed this educational trajectory, they've spent 20 years or more in elite institutions, accumulating credentials and connections that will support them throughout life. Now let's consider the philanthropic activities that occupy much of old money's time and attention. Charity work and philanthropy aren't just about giving money. They're about serving on boards, attending galas and fundraisers, volunteering time and expertise, using social capital to advance causes. Old money families often have deep involvement with particular institutions: the local hospital, the art museum, the symphony, the private school they attended, their university. Serving on non-profit boards is particularly important. Board positions carry prestige and provide purpose. They allow wealthy individuals to contribute their business acumen and connections to organizations doing work they care about. They also create opportunities to work alongside other wealthy, influential people, maintaining and extending social networks. A board seat at a major museum or hospital foundation is both genuine service and social positioning. The fundraising gala is a crucial institution in old money's social calendar. These events, black tie dinners, auctions, balls supporting various causes, serve multiple functions. They raise money, yes, but they also provide venues for the wealthy to socialize with peers, to see and be seen, to signal their charitable commitments and social standing. Attending the right galas, sitting at the right tables, being involved with the right organizations, these are ways of maintaining social position and participating in the rituals of your class. There's a competitive element to philanthropy among the very wealthy. Who gives the most? Whose name is on the new building? Who serves on the most prestigious boards? This competition, while perhaps ego-driven, results in substantial giving that benefits society. Universities receive endowments, hospitals get new wings, museums acquire collections, social service organizations receive sustained funding. The motivations might be mixed: genuine charitable impulse combined with social positioning and ego gratification, but the effects can be quite positive. Old money philanthropy tends to support particular kinds of causes: education, private schools, elite universities, scholarship programs, arts and culture, museums, symphonies, opera, ballet. Medical institutions, hospitals, research institutes, these are causes that carry prestige and that serve communities, including their own. You'll find less old money support for controversial causes or for activism that might threaten existing social structures. This isn't universal. Some old money families do support progressive causes, but there's a tendency towards supporting establishment institutions that preserve culture and opportunity as it currently exists. Let's talk about how old money handles money practically on a day-to-day basis. Despite enormous wealth, many old money families are quite careful about spending. This isn't stinginess, but conscientiousness. They know what things cost, they budget, they avoid waste. This seems paradoxical. Why would someone worth hundreds of millions or billions care about spending an extra $100? But it's about values and habit, not about the specific amount. There are stories, some apocryphal but illustrative, about old money's careful habits. The billionaire who uses coupons at the grocery store. The wealthy family that buys generic brands rather than name brands when the quality is equivalent. The heir who turns off lights in empty rooms to save electricity. These behaviours aren't about the money saved, which is trivial relative to their wealth. They're about values, avoiding waste, being conscientious, not taking resources for granted. They're also about modelling behaviour for children, teaching that wealth doesn't mean carelessness or extravagance. Banking relationships in old money families tend to be long-term and personal. They might bank with the same institution for generations, knowing the managers personally. Receiving personalised service. They might have a dedicated private banker who knows the family's entire financial situation and provides customised advice. These relationships provide better service and terms than retail banking customers receive, but they also create loyalty and continuity. The bank knows the family, understands their needs, provides seamless service across generations. Credit card usage is interesting. Many old money families use credit cards relatively little, preferring to pay cash or cheque, or to have accounts at stores where they shop regularly. When they do use credit cards, they pay balances in full each month. Carrying credit card debt at high interest rates would be viewed as foolish money management. They might use charge cards that require full payment monthly rather than revolving credit cards. And they take advantage of rewards programs. If you're going to spend money anyway, why not get airline miles or cash back? This attention to small optimizations, even when the amounts involved are trivial relative to overall wealth, is characteristic. Let's consider how old money families think about risk in their personal lives, beyond investment risk. They're typically quite risk-averse about anything that could threaten family wealth or reputation. They avoid scandals, avoiding situations that could lead to embarrassing publicity. They're careful about legal exposure, structuring affairs to minimize lawsuit risk. They maintain privacy, sharing little about family finances even with friends. They're cautious about who they trust with confidential information. This caution extends to relationships. Dating someone from outside their social class creates concerns. Not necessarily classism, though that can be part of it, but genuine worries about motivations and compatibility. Is this person interested in family wealth? Will they fit into the family culture? Do they understand the expectations and responsibilities that come with marrying into an old money family? These concerns lead to preference for marrying within their social class where these questions are less fraught. Prenuptial agreements are standard in old money marriages, even when both parties come from wealthy families. This isn't romantic, but it's practical. It protects family wealth from leaving family control in the event of divorce. It creates clarity about financial arrangements from the beginning. It's viewed not as planning for divorce, but as prudent protection of family assets that extend beyond any individual marriage. The prenup is negotiated by lawyers, kept confidential, and ideally never referred to again, but its existence protects the family structure. Insurance is another area where old money is quite sophisticated. Beyond standard homeowners and auto insurance, they carry substantial umbrella liability policies protecting against lawsuit risk. They insure valuable collections, art, jewellery, antiques, with specialised policies. They have key person insurance on business leaders. They use life insurance in sophisticated estate planning strategies. Insurance is viewed as essential risk management, part of the infrastructure protecting wealth. Security is taken seriously but usually discreetly. Old money families often have security systems, sometimes employ security personnel, take precautions against kidnapping risk for children, but they do this quietly. They don't have ostentatious security details that draw attention. They prefer security measures that are effective but invisible. The goal is protection without publicity, without creating the impression of being under siege or being afraid. Let your mind rest for a moment with all these practical details. Notice how they add up to a way of life that's distinctive, that reflects values around preservation and discretion and tradition. Notice how even mundane daily choices, what to wear, where to shop, how to spend time, are shaped by and reinforce the culture that preserves wealth across generations. These aren't arbitrary preferences. They're practical expressions of principles designed to maintain family wealth and social position indefinitely. Now let's explore how old money families approach legacy in the future, because this long-term orientation shapes everything else. They're not just planning for their children, but for grandchildren not yet born. For descendants they'll never meet. This requires thinking about what they want to preserve beyond just money. What values matter? What family traditions are worth maintaining? What institutions deserve support? What kind of world do they want to leave for future generations? Many old money families create formal statements of values and purpose. These might be incorporated into family constitutions or mission statements. They articulate what the family stands for. What wealth should be used for? What behaviours are expected from family members? These documents are taken seriously, referred to when making decisions, updated periodically to reflect changing circumstances while maintaining core principles. They provide continuity and clarity across generations. The concept of stewardship is central to old money's future orientation. Current family members see themselves as temporary custodians of wealth that belongs to the family across time. They didn't create most of it, they inherited it. They won't take it with them, they'll pass it on. Their job is to preserve it, ideally grow it, certainly not diminish it, and transmit both the wealth and the values to the next generation. This creates a sense of responsibility that transcends personal desires. This stewardship mindset affects decision-making in countless ways. Should we sell this family property to developers? It would generate substantial cash. But the property has been in the family for 5 generations and holds family history. The stewardship perspective says maintain the property. Should we take large distributions from the family trust to fund lavish lifestyles? It's legally possible, but doing so would reduce what's passed to the next generation. The stewardship perspective says live comfortably but modestly, leaving the capital base intact. Should we invest in socially beneficial but lower returning investments? The purely financial calculation says no, but the values perspective might say yes. Environmental conservation is an area where old money stewardship often manifests. Many old money families own significant land, forests, farms, rangeland, that they've held for generations. They could sell this land for development and realise enormous gains. Instead, they often maintain it in conservation easements or donate it to land trusts, ensuring it remains undeveloped in perpetuity. This sacrifices financial value for environmental and legacy value. The land will never be used to maximise economic return, but it will remain in something like its natural state for future generations. This environmental consciousness extends beyond land they own. Many old money families support environmental causes, endow conservation programs, advocate for policies protecting natural resources. This reflects both genuine environmental values and a long-term perspective. When you're thinking in terms of centuries, you care about environmental sustainability because your descendants will inherit whatever world we create. Short-term thinking leads to exploitation. Long-term thinking leads to conservation. Artistic and cultural patronage is another way old money thinks about legacy. By supporting museums, symphonies, libraries, universities, they're ensuring these institutions exist for future generations. A family that endows a museum wing or funds a professorship at their university is creating something that will last beyond their lifetime, that will carry their name and values forward. This is legacy building, creating visible, lasting contributions that memorialize the family. Family histories and archives are maintained carefully. Old photographs, letters, documents, heirlooms. These are preserved, sometimes professionally archived, passed down across generations. The goal is to maintain continuity, to ensure future generations understand where they came from, who their ancestors were, what the family has accomplished and endured. This creates a sense of being part of something larger than yourself, of being a link in a chain, extending backward to ancestors and forward to descendants. Some families commission written histories, sometimes by professional historians, documenting the family story. These aren't just vanity projects. They're efforts to preserve memory, to extract lessons from family history, to inspire future generations. The story of how great-great-grandfather built the business, the challenges great-grandmother overcame, the contributions various family members made to society. These stories become part of family mythology, shaping how current and future family members see themselves and their responsibilities. The question of how much to tell children about family wealth is handled in various ways. Some families are quite open, discussing finances from an early age. Others are secretive, not revealing the full extent of wealth until children are adults. There's no consensus on the best approach. Being too open might create entitlement or spoil children. Being too secretive might leave them unprepared for the responsibilities they'll inherit. Most families seek some middle ground, age-appropriate information, increasing disclosure as children mature and demonstrate responsibility. What's almost universal is an effort to instill work ethic and values before revealing full wealth. Children might be given modest allowances, required to work summer jobs, expected to achieve academically, all before they understand that they'll inherit enough never to need employment. The theory is that if they develop good character and work habits before knowing they're wealthy, those habits and values will persist. If they learn too early that they'll never need to work, they might never develop the drive and discipline that create fulfilling lives. Many old money families require children to achieve certain milestones before accessing trust funds. Graduate from college, maintain employment for 5 years, reach age 30 or 35. Demonstrate financial responsibility with smaller amounts of money before receiving larger distributions. These requirements serve multiple purposes. They ensure children develop competence and maturity. They prevent young people from dissipating wealth before they understand its value, and they create achievable goals that give structure and purpose to young adulthood. The succession question, who leads the family in the next generation, is often handled through performance and aptitude rather than just birth order. The most capable and interested family members are groomed for leadership positions, serving as trustees, managing the family office, leading family businesses or foundations. Others who are less interested or capable are supported but not given authority over family wealth. This meritocratic approach helps ensure competent management while also potentially creating resentment among those excluded from leadership. Family meetings and councils, which we've mentioned before, become more important as families grow larger. When there are dozens or hundreds of family members spread across multiple generations, maintaining cohesion requires structure. Regular gatherings, perhaps annually or semi-annually, bring family together, allow collective decision-making on important matters, provide forums for resolving conflicts, reinforce family identity. These meetings might last a weekend or longer, with formal business sessions combined with social activities and family bonding. The challenge is keeping these family structures relevant and engaging across generations. The founder's children might embrace family meetings and structures because they remember the founder and feel direct connection. Grandchildren might still participate out of respect and identification with family. But by the fourth or fifth generation, many family members might feel little connection to ancestors they never met or to cousins they barely know. Maintaining engagement requires making structures serve members' interests, not just imposing obligations. Families that succeed in staying cohesive across many generations typically do so by providing genuine value to members, financial support, yes, but also networking opportunities, shared experiences, sense of belonging, connections that enrich life. Let yourself contemplate for a moment this long-term orientation. This thinking in terms of generations and centuries, it's profoundly different from how most people relate to the future, which is typically bounded by personal lifespan and immediate family. Old money families that successfully preserve wealth are thinking beyond themselves, beyond even their children, to descendants they'll never meet. They're making decisions whose consequences will play out long after they're gone. They're sacrificing personal gratification for abstracted future benefit. This requires a particular mindset, a particular set of values that isn't natural or easy, but that can be developed and maintained through culture and structure. As we continue our exploration, we'll see how these long-term perspectives connect to broader questions about wealth, inequality, society, and what kind of world we want to create. But let those questions rest for now. Let your breathing slow. Let yourself drift with these ideas, turning them over gently in your mind, observing how they fit together to create a coherent approach to preserving wealth across the generations. Let's turn now to exploring the relationship between old money and new money, because this dynamic reveals much about how wealth preservation works and about the social structures that support or threaten it. The tension between established wealth and newly created wealth has existed for as long as there have been social hierarchies. And understanding this relationship helps us see how old money maintains its position across time. New money represents a fundamental challenge to old money's social dominance. When someone builds a fortune from nothing, they've achieved something genuinely impressive. They've created value, seized opportunities, demonstrated capabilities that most people don't have. Their wealth is earned in a very real sense through their own efforts. This gives them a kind of moral legitimacy that inherited wealth can't claim. If we believe in meritocracy, in the idea that people should be rewarded for their talents and efforts, then new money should be celebrated and old money should be somewhat suspect. Old money understands this threat and has developed various strategies for dealing with it. The first and most obvious is exclusion. Social institutions controlled by old money, private clubs, certain neighborhoods, social registers, elite schools to some degree, create barriers that money alone can't overcome. You need not just wealth, but the right kind of wealth, the right background, the right connections, the right manners and cultural knowledge. These barriers serve to slow new money's entry into old money's social world, preserving old money's dominance at least temporarily. But exclusion can only work for so long. New money that persists across a generation or two begins to look like old money. The founder might be excluded from certain social circles, but their grandchildren, educated at the right schools and married into the right families, might be accepted. This absorption of new money into old money ranks has happened countless times throughout history. The Astors were new money in the early 1800s, considered gauche by older New York families. By the late 1800s, they were established old money, looking down on newer arrivals. The Vanderbilts went through a similar trajectory, as did many other families. This absorption serves important functions for old money as a class. It brings in fresh wealth, supplementing fortunes that might be declining through division or poor management. It brings in new energy and talent, successful entrepreneurs and their descendants who might invigorate old money institutions and businesses. And it maintains the principle that wealth, rather than birth alone, determines social position. This is important in a democratic society that officially rejects aristocracy. Old money can't be purely hereditary or it loses legitimacy. By absorbing successful new money, old money maintains the fiction that position is based on merit, or at least on having wealth, rather than on accident of birth. The process of absorption typically takes time and requires the new money family to adopt old money values and behaviours. They must learn how to dress, how to speak, what cultural references matter, which causes to support, how to behave in social situations. They must send their children to the right schools, join the right clubs, move to the right neighbourhoods. They must demonstrate that they share old money's values around discretion, tradition, and stewardship, rather than new money's tendencies toward conspicuous consumption and social climbing. Those who successfully make this transition are eventually accepted. Those who don't remain perpetually on the outside. The relationship between old money and new money is often marked by mutual disdain. Old money looks down on new money as vulgar, flashy, lacking in taste and refinement, trying too hard. There's a sense that new money doesn't understand the subtle codes of behaviour that mark true gentility, that they're mimicking behaviours without understanding their deeper meaning. Old money might mock new money's ostentatious houses, their garish clothing, their social awkwardness, their lack of cultural sophistication. This mockery serves to reinforce old money's sense of superiority despite new money often having more wealth. New money, for its part, often views old money as lazy, entitled, living off inherited wealth they did nothing to earn, clinging to outdated traditions and snobbish attitudes. There's resentment of old money's social gatekeeping, of the barriers that keep talented, successful people out of certain institutions simply because they weren't born into the right families. New money might see old money as parasitic, contributing little while consuming resources accumulated by ancestors who actually created value. This resentment can be quite intense, particularly when new money individuals are excluded from institutions they could easily afford to join. These mutual attitudes aren't universal, of course. Some old money families are welcoming to new money, recognizing their achievements and viewing fresh wealth as strengthening rather than threatening the wealthy class overall. And some new money individuals are quite respectful of old money traditions, seeing them as worth preserving and adopting. But the tensions exist and shape interactions between the two groups. In some cities and contexts, new money has essentially displaced old money as the dominant wealthy class. This is particularly true in newer cities and in technology hubs. San Francisco and Silicon Valley, for instance, are dominated by new tech wealth. The old San Francisco families still exist, but they're overshadowed by newly wealthy tech founders and executives. The social institutions are different. Less emphasis on traditional clubs and societies, more emphasis on innovation and disruption. The values are different. Old money's conservatism replaced by new money's embrace of change. In these environments, being new money isn't a social liability. It's almost an advantage, a sign that you're part of the dynamic, creative forces shaping the future rather than clinging to the past. But in older cities, with established old money communities, Boston, Philadelphia, Charleston, New York to some extent, old money maintains more social dominance despite often having less wealth than new money arrivals. The social institutions remain important. The old families retain prestige and influence. New money can buy houses in the right neighborhoods and send children to the right schools. But full social acceptance might take a generation or more. The old money families control the boards of museums and hospitals and universities, maintain the social clubs, set the tone for what's considered appropriate behaviour. New money can participate, but often on old money's terms. Let's think about how old money and new money approach philanthropy differently, because this reveals different value systems and different relationships with wealth. New money philanthropy often focuses on solving problems, on achieving measurable impact, on innovation and disruption. A tech billionaire might fund research into life extension or space exploration, or artificial intelligence. They might create new organizations rather than supporting existing ones. They might be willing to fund controversial causes or experimental approaches. They bring an entrepreneurial mindset to giving. What's the highest impact use of these resources? How do we measure success? How do we innovate in the non-profit sector? Old money philanthropy, as we've discussed, tends towards supporting established institutions, universities, museums, hospitals. The goal is less about innovation and more about stewardship, about maintaining cultural institutions that preserve civilization and serve communities. Old money donors often join boards and work closely with organizations they support, building long-term relationships rather than just writing checks. They value tradition and proven approaches over experimentation. They're more likely to give to maintain existing programs than to fund new initiatives. Neither approach is inherently better. New money's focus on impact and innovation can lead to breakthrough solutions to difficult problems. Old money's focus on institutions and tradition ensures that important cultural resources are maintained across generations. But the different approaches reflect different values and different relationships with wealth. New money sees wealth as a tool for change. Old money sees wealth as a resource for preservation. The media treatment of old money versus new money is also revealing. New money gets enormous media attention. Every move of tech billionaires is reported, analysed, celebrated or criticised. They're celebrities, public figures whose opinions on everything from philanthropy to politics to technology are solicited and amplified. This publicity serves new money's egos and brands, but also makes them targets for criticism, for lawsuits, for unwanted attention. Old money, by contrast, often successfully maintains privacy. Many old money families are unknown to the general public despite having enormous wealth. They're not on Forbes lists because their wealth is tied up in private structures that don't require disclosure. They don't give interviews or appear on television. They don't have public social media presence. This invisibility protects them, but also means they're less influential in shaping public discourse. New money dominates the conversation about wealth, about technology, about the future, while old money operates quietly in the background. This difference in public visibility affects how different types of wealth are perceived and regulated. New money attracts political attention, calls for wealth taxes, for breaking up big tech companies, for regulating billionaires. Old money, being less visible, attracts less political targeting. The structures that protect old money wealth, trusts, foundations, family-limited partnerships, have existed for decades or longer and are deeply embedded in tax and legal codes. They're politically difficult to change because they are established, because they benefit a dispersed group rather than a few visible individuals, because they're complex and technical rather than simple and obvious. New money sometimes envies old money's privacy and social acceptance while rejecting the restrictions and obligations that come with old money culture. Old money sometimes envies new money's freedom and creativity while looking down on their lack of refinement. Each group has advantages the other lacks. The question for new money is whether they want to become old money over generations, adopting old money values and structures to preserve wealth across time, or whether they want to maintain new money's entrepreneurial spirit, even if it means wealth might not last as long. Some new money families are quite consciously trying to build old money style structures. They create family offices, establish foundations, set up trusts, develop family governance systems, articulate values for transmission to future generations. They're learning from old money successes and trying to replicate them. Whether they'll succeed remains to be seen. It takes multiple generations to know whether wealth has been truly preserved. But the intention is clear. They want their fortunes to last beyond their own lifetimes, to benefit grandchildren and great-grandchildren, to create family legacies that endure. Other new money individuals reject this approach entirely. They're spending their wealth during their lifetimes on consumption and on philanthropy. They explicitly don't want to create dynasties. Warren Buffett and Bill Gates, for instance, have pledged to give away most of their wealth. leaving their children well off but not spectacularly wealthy. Their philosophy is that vast inherited wealth is harmful to children, that it's better for society if wealth is recycled through philanthropy rather than locked up in family trusts. This represents a fundamental rejection of old money's approach, a different set of values around what wealth should be used for. Let's consider how old money views technological and economic disruption, because this reveals their conservative orientation and their concerns about threats to established systems. Old money often has significant investments in traditional industries and in the established economic order. They benefit from stability. Rapid change threatens their position, both economically, their investments might lose value, and socially, new industries create new elites who might challenge old money's social dominance. This creates a complicated relationship with innovation. On one hand, old money families often invest in new technologies and businesses, seeking returns and staying relevant. On the other hand, there's often suspicion of disruption, of rapid change, of the creative destruction that capitalism generates. Old money would generally prefer evolution to revolution, gradual change that allows adaptation rather than sudden transformation that overturns existing arrangements. Consider how old money has responded to various technological and economic changes over history. The shift from agriculture to industry in the 19th century threatened old money families whose wealth was based in land. Some adapted, investing in railroads and manufacturing. Others declined, unable or unwilling to shift capital from traditional to modern sectors. The shift from industrial to financial and service economies in the late 20th century created similar challenges. Families whose wealth was tied up in manufacturing businesses faced difficult decisions about whether to maintain those businesses, despite declining profitability, or to shift to new sectors. The recent rise of cryptocurrency and decentralized finance represents a particular challenge to old money. These technologies explicitly aim to disrupt traditional finance, to create alternatives to the banks and financial institutions that old money has long controlled or benefited from. Old money's response has been varied. Some have invested in crypto, seeing it as an inevitable trend worth participating in. Others have avoided it, viewing it as speculative and risky. Still others have actively opposed it, seeing it as a threat to the established financial order that serves their interests. This pattern repeats with most major innovations. Old money is rarely at the forefront of change. They're not the entrepreneurs creating new industries or technologies, but they're often early investors once something has proven viable, using their capital to benefit from innovations created by others, and they adapt their portfolios and strategies as economies change, though often more slowly and conservatively than new money would. Let's talk about how old money thinks about inequality, because their position at the top of the wealth distribution shapes their perspectives on this increasingly salient issue. There's a tension in old money's relationship with inequality. On one hand, they benefit from it. They're the primary beneficiaries of a system that allows vast wealth accumulation and preservation. On the other hand, extreme inequality creates social instability and political pressure for redistribution, which threatens their position. Some old money families take the position that inequality is natural and even beneficial. Wealth accumulates, with those most capable of managing it. The wealthy support culture and philanthropy, and economic growth in ways that benefit everyone. Attempts to redistribute wealth through taxation or regulation are counterproductive, harming economic efficiency and reducing incentives for wealth creation and entrepreneurship. This view sees old money families as benevolent stewards, whose wealth serves broader social purposes, and it opposes policies that would reduce wealth concentration. Other old money families, often those most secure in their position, take a more progressive view. They recognize that extreme inequality is socially corrosive, that it creates resentment and instability, that it's incompatible with genuine democracy and equal opportunity. They support higher taxes on the wealthy, stronger regulations, more robust social programs. This isn't pure altruism. They're also concerned with social stability and maintaining a functioning society. but it represents a willingness to accept some reduction in personal wealth for broader social benefit. Most old money families fall somewhere between these extremes, uncomfortable with the most extreme inequality, but also resistant to dramatic redistribution. They might support incremental reforms, modest tax increases, better education funding, more support for the poor, while opposing more radical changes like wealth taxes or significant estate tax increases. They want a more just society, but also want to preserve their own position and their ability to pass wealth to future generations. Balancing these competing desires creates complicated political positions that might seem inconsistent but reflect genuine tensions in their interests and values. The question of what old money owes to society is contested even within old money families. The noblesse oblige tradition says that privilege creates obligation, that the wealthy should contribute through philanthropy and service, but how much is enough? If you give away 10% of your wealth or income, have you fulfilled your obligation? 20%? 50%? There's no consensus, and individual families answer this question based on their own values and circumstances. Let yourself rest for a moment with these tensions between old money and new money, between stability and change, between inequality and justice. Notice how complex these issues are, how there aren't simple answers that satisfy everyone's interests and values. Notice how old money's position shapes their perspectives, making them generally more conservative, more focused on preservation, more skeptical of dramatic change, but also sometimes more thoughtful about long-term consequences because they're thinking in terms of generations rather than quarters or election cycles. Now let's explore the international dimension of old money, because wealth preservation increasingly requires thinking globally rather than just nationally. We've discussed how old money families have historically spread wealth across countries to protect against political risk. This practice has intensified in recent decades as capital has become more mobile and as wealthy families have become more internationally oriented. Many old money families now have family members living in multiple countries. The children might be educated in England or Switzerland. One branch of the family might live in New York, another in London, a third in Singapore or Dubai. This geographic dispersion serves several purposes. It provides exposure to different cultures and opportunities. It creates flexibility if political or economic conditions deteriorate in one country. Family members in other countries are insulated. It allows families to optimize taxes and regulations by operating under multiple jurisdictions. And it creates truly international networks and perspectives. Citizenship planning has become important for internationally minded old money families. Some countries offer citizenship by investment programs. Invest a certain amount. Get a passport. Other countries have favorable tax treatment for foreign residents. Some families ensure their children are born in particular countries to gain citizenship. The goal is to have options, to not be locked into a single country's jurisdiction, to maintain flexibility as political and economic conditions change globally. Offshore financial centres, places like Switzerland, Singapore, the Cayman Islands, Monaco, play important roles in old money's international strategies. These jurisdictions offer privacy, favourable tax treatment, political stability, sophisticated financial services, and sometimes citizenship opportunities. Old money families use these centres for banking, for holding investments, for establishing trusts and other structures. This isn't necessarily illegal or even improper. These are legitimate financial centres offering legal services, but it does reduce tax revenues in the family's home countries and can seem like dodging obligations. The debate about offshore wealth has intensified in recent years as governments and international organisations have pushed for more financial transparency, agreements to share tax information across borders, requirements to disclose foreign accounts, pressure on offshore centres to reduce secrecy. These efforts aim to reduce tax avoidance and to ensure the wealthy pay taxes where they earn income or reside. Old money families have adapted, in some cases becoming more compliant, in other cases finding new strategies to maintain privacy and tax efficiency. European old money families have particular international perspectives shaped by history. Many have properties and investments across multiple European countries, reflecting both historical family expansion and the European Union's creation of a more unified economic zone. The ease of moving capital, goods, and people across European borders has made pan-European strategies natural for wealthy families. Brexit has complicated this for British old money families, creating new barriers and requiring strategic adjustments, but the broader trend toward international diversification continues. Asian old money families are interesting because they often combine very traditional values around family and filial piety with sophisticated international financial strategies. Many Asian business families maintain strong family control over businesses across multiple generations, with succession typically passing to sons. But they also aggressively pursue international expansion, listing companies on multiple stock exchanges, investing globally, sending children to Western universities. This combination of traditional and modern, of Eastern and Western approaches, creates distinctive family cultures. Middle Eastern old money, particularly oil wealth in the Gulf states, represents another interesting case. This wealth was created relatively recently, mostly in the 20th century, but has been managed with very long time horizons. Sovereign wealth funds investing hundreds of billions of dollars globally, diversifying away from oil dependence, buying stakes in everything from real estate to technology companies to sports franchises. The families controlling these states are using oil wealth to build diversified portfolios that will sustain them for generations after oil becomes less valuable. Latin American old money families often face particular challenges around political instability and wealth security. Many have experienced expropriations, dramatic political swings, currency crises, and economic volatility. This has made them particularly attuned to protecting wealth internationally, to maintaining assets outside their home countries, to having exit strategies if political situations deteriorate. The result is often substantial capital flight, wealth that could be invested in Latin American development, instead sitting in banks and investments in the United States or Europe. The global spread of old money creates questions about loyalty and obligation. If your family has lived in a country for generations but keeps most wealth offshore, are you really part of that national community? Do you have obligations to support that society through taxes and investment? Or is wealth inherently global, with families free to optimize their positions regardless of national boundaries? Old money families answer these questions in various ways, with some maintaining strong national identities and commitments, while others embrace essentially post-national orientations. Let's consider how old money families think about education internationally. The top boarding schools and universities have become increasingly global. Students come from dozens of countries. The networks formed are international. This creates opportunities for old money families to connect with global elites, to ensure their children are comfortable operating across cultures, to build truly international networks that can be valuable in business and in preserving wealth globally. Some old money families deliberately ensure their children are multilingual, hiring nannies who speak different languages, sending children to international schools, requiring study abroad experiences. Language skills open opportunities, create cultural understanding, and signal global sophistication. A child who speaks English, French, and Mandarin is prepared to operate in most major global centres. This investment in linguistic and cultural capital complements financial capital, creating well-rounded preparation for managing wealth in a globalised world. The marriage market for old money has also become more international. While there's still a tendency to marry within national communities, international marriages among the global elite are increasingly common. A child from an American old money family might marry someone from a European or Asian old money family, creating bonds across continents. These marriages can be genuine love matches. The children meet at university or through social networks, but they also create strategic alliances, combining family resources and networks across borders. Let's think about how different national cultures shape old money families. American old money tends to be less formal and more meritocratic than European old money, reflecting broader American cultural values. There's less emphasis on titles and formal aristocracy, though some American families maintain pretensions to aristocratic status, and more emphasis on achievement and wealth itself. European old money, particularly in countries with aristocratic traditions, often maintains more formal hierarchies and more emphasis on birth and lineage rather than just wealth. British old money exemplifies this, with complex intersections between titled aristocracy and wealthy but untitled families. A family might have enormous wealth but no title, or a title but diminished wealth. The aristocracy has adapted to economic changes by marrying American heiresses in the 19th and early 20th centuries, commercializing estates through tourism and events, selling properties and investing proceeds. The result is that many titled families have maintained social position while adapting economically to survive. French old money families similarly navigate between aristocratic traditions and modern economic reality. Many maintain connections to historic estates and titles, while also operating businesses or managing investments. The French state's role in limiting very large wealth, through taxation, through regulations, through cultural attitudes skeptical of extreme wealth, has shaped how old money operates, often requiring more discretion and more sophisticated structures than in more wealth-friendly countries. Asian old money families, particularly in countries like India, China, and throughout Southeast Asia, often combine family business control with complex family structures that can include multiple wives. Many children, extended family members, all involved in business and wealth. The Western model of nuclear family with clear inheritance structures doesn't always apply. Instead, there might be more fluid family boundaries, more collective ownership, more involvement of distant relatives. This creates both opportunities for family solidarity and potential for conflict as families grow large and complex. Let yourself contemplate the global nature of old money in the modern world. Notice how families that successfully preserve wealth across generations increasingly do so by thinking beyond national boundaries, by spreading risk and opportunity globally, by preparing descendants to operate internationally, by maintaining flexibility to move capital and people as conditions change. Notice also the tensions this creates, between national loyalty and global optimization, between maintaining cultural roots and embracing international cosmopolitanism, between the particular histories and traditions of specific places and families and the homogenizing effects of global elite culture. These are tensions without clear resolutions, navigated differently by different families, shaped by their particular histories and values and circumstances. As we prepare to move forward to our next exploration, let these ideas about old money and new money, about international wealth preservation, about the global elite culture that increasingly connects wealthy families across national boundaries, let all of this settle in your mind. Let your breathing slow. Let yourself absorb the complexity of how wealth operates at the highest levels, across borders, across generations, shaped by history, but constantly adapting to changing circumstances. There's no rush to understand everything at once. Let it unfold gradually, like watching currents in a deep, slow river, complex patterns becoming visible as you watch patiently over time. Let's turn now to exploring the darker aspects of old money and multi-generational wealth, because understanding how wealth is preserved requires acknowledging not just the successful strategies, but also the costs, the failures, and the problematic elements that often accompany concentrated wealth across generations. This isn't about condemnation, but about seeing the full picture, the shadows alongside the light. One of the most persistent challenges facing old money families is the psychological burden that inherited wealth places on individuals. We've discussed some of this already, but let's go deeper into the specific ways that being born into great wealth can damage people's development and happiness. because despite all the obvious advantages that wealth provides, there are real psychological costs that shouldn't be minimized or dismissed. Consider the heir who grows up knowing they'll never need to work, never face real financial consequences for their choices, never have to prove themselves in the way that most people must. This removes fundamental sources of meaning and identity that most humans derive from struggle and achievement. Psychologists call this learned helplessness in some cases. When people understand that their actions don't really matter because outcomes are predetermined, they stop trying. Why work hard in school when you'll inherit wealth regardless? Why develop skills when you'll never need to use them professionally? Why save money when you have unlimited resources? The result can be a kind of aimlessness, a drifting through life without purpose or direction. Some wealthy heirs fill this void productively, with careers they're passionate about, with serious philanthropy, with creative pursuits. But others never find that sense of purpose. They move from one hobby to another, one relationship to another, one expensive distraction to another, never quite finding fulfillment. From the outside, their lives might look enviable. Traveling the world, experiencing everything money can buy, freed from the burdens most people face. But inside, there's often emptiness, a sense that life lacks meaning because nothing has ever been truly earned or achieved through their own efforts. There's also what's sometimes called affluenza, a term that's partly joking but describes a real phenomenon. The children of extreme wealth can develop a sense of entitlement so profound that they cannot function in normal social interactions. They expect constant service, immediate gratification, deference from others. They've never been told no, never faced real consequences, never learned the basic social skills of compromise and consideration for others. When they finally encounter situations where their wealth doesn't insulate them, a romantic rejection, a social snub, a failure at something, they lack the coping mechanisms that most people develop through childhood and adolescence. Substance abuse and addiction are unfortunately common among the children of extreme wealth. The reasons are complex. Boredom and lack of purpose can lead to seeking excitement through drugs or alcohol. Unlimited money means unlimited access to substances and unlimited ability to sustain habits that would bankrupt most people. Family dynamics, emotional distance from parents, pressure to maintain appearances, inability to discuss real feelings can drive people towards substances as escape or self-medication. And the enabling that wealth allows means that consequences that might force most addicts toward recovery, losing jobs, running out of money, hitting bottom, never arrive for wealthy addicts. They can sustain their habits indefinitely, destroying their lives slowly while maintaining outward appearances of functionality. Mental health issues more broadly are a challenge in old money families, partly because of the psychological burdens we've discussed, but also because there's often stigma around admitting problems or seeking help. Old money culture values discretion and maintaining appearances. Admitting that your child has depression or anxiety or other mental health issues feels like admitting family failure, like airing dirty laundry publicly. So problems are often hidden, minimized, or dealt with privately rather than addressed openly and professionally. Families might send a troubled child to a series of expensive private therapists or residential treatment facilities, but without addressing underlying family dynamics or societal pressures that contribute to the problems. Or they might simply enable the person, providing money and support that allows them to continue dysfunctional behaviors indefinitely. The result is that mental health problems that could be treated if addressed early and aggressively instead become chronic, defining the person's entire life. Let's talk about family conflict and estrangement, because these are heartbreakingly common in old money families despite having resources that should make life easier. Money creates conflict. Disputes over inheritance, over who controls family businesses or foundations, over how wealth should be used, over who deserves what. These conflicts can tear families apart. Siblings who grew up together might end up not speaking for decades over disputes about money. Parents and children might become estranged over financial issues or over expectations about how wealth should be used or passed down. The courts are full of cases involving wealthy families suing each other. Children suing parents over trusts or inheritances, siblings suing each other over business control, divorcing spouses fighting over assets. These legal battles can last for years, cost millions in legal fees, expose private family matters to public scrutiny, and leave emotional scars that never fully heal. The tragedy is that there's usually enough wealth for everyone to live comfortably, but the disputes aren't really about need. They're about fairness, about respect, about control, about long-simmering resentments that money brings to the surface. Some of these conflicts arise from genuine unfairness in how wealth is distributed, or how family members are treated. A parent who clearly favours one child over others, who gives more responsibility or resources to one heir while neglecting others, creates justified resentment. A family governance structure that systematically excludes certain family members from decision-making while including others creates legitimate grievances. When these structural unfairnesses are combined with huge amounts of money and power, the resulting conflicts can be devastating. Other conflicts arise from unrealistic expectations or from family members who are simply difficult people. The heir, who feels entitled to more than they're receiving, who views any restriction on accessing wealth as unfair, who resents any accountability or oversight. The family member who uses litigation as a weapon, who threatens lawsuits to extract concessions, who makes life miserable for others through constant legal threats. Every family has difficult members, but when combined with great wealth, difficult personalities can create ongoing drama and dysfunction that affects everyone. The question of fairness in inheritance is particularly fraught. Should wealth be divided equally among all children regardless of their contributions to family business or their financial needs? Should those who work in the family business receive more than those who don't? Should children who've already received substantial gifts during a parent's lifetime receive less inheritance to equalize things? Should grandchildren receive equal inheritances even if their parents receive different amounts? There are no universally right answers to these questions, and different families answer them differently, but however they're answered. Some family members will likely feel it's unfair. Let's consider the issue of family members who essentially prey on other family members' wealth. This is more common than you might think. The irresponsible sibling who's constantly asking for money to bail them out of financial problems, who's borrowed repeatedly and never repaid, who claims they'll change but never does. The adult child who's living off parents indefinitely, who's never launched an independent life, who's supported at age 40 or 50 as if they were still a dependent child. The distant relative who appears whenever there's money to be had, but who disappears when support or help is needed. These situations create terrible dilemmas for families. Cutting off support might be the right thing to do. It might force the person to become independent and responsible. But it's emotionally difficult to deny help to family members, especially when you have abundant resources. There's guilt and a sense of obligation. What if they really need the money? What if something terrible happens because you refuse to help? The enabling continues. The dysfunctional patterns persist, and resentment builds among other family members who see resources being wasted on someone who won't change. Let's talk about the ways that old money families have historically used their wealth and power in problematic ways, because this is part of the story that can't be ignored. Wealth doesn't just preserve itself passively. Throughout history, wealthy families have actively worked to maintain their position and to shape society in ways that benefit them, sometimes at great cost to others. Labour exploitation is part of many old money fortunes' origins. The brutal working conditions in early factories, mines, railroads. These created enormous wealth for owners while workers suffered and died. Child labour, dangerous conditions, poverty wages, violent suppression of labour organising. These weren't aberrations but standard practices. The wealth that's now managed so carefully and philanthropically in some old money families was built partly on the suffering of workers who had no choice but to accept terrible conditions because they needed to survive. This history doesn't necessarily taint current family members who had nothing to do with these practices and who might genuinely regret them. But it's part of the story. The Rockefeller fortune, for instance, was built partly through ruthlessly anti-competitive practices that destroyed competitors and exploited workers. Standard Oil's monopoly practices, which led to the company being broken up under antitrust law, enriched the Rockefeller family enormously while harming competitors and consumers. Yes, the family later became known for extraordinary philanthropy, but that doesn't erase the methods by which the wealth was originally accumulated. Slavery is an even darker part of some old money families' histories. Many of the oldest American fortunes were built partly on slavery, either directly through owning enslaved people, or indirectly through businesses that depended on slavery, or on industries like cotton or sugar that were produced by enslaved labour. The wealth that these families preserve today has roots in one of history's greatest moral atrocities. Some families acknowledge this history and try to make amends through philanthropy or reparations. Others prefer not to discuss it, or minimise the connection between current wealth and historical slavery. Political corruption and influence peddling have been tools that wealthy families have used to protect and advance their interests. Bribing politicians, writing legislation to favour their businesses, using political connections to gain advantages or avoid regulations. These practices were common in the Gilded Age, and to some extent continue today in more sophisticated forms. The line between legitimate political engagement and corruption can be blurry, but there's no question that wealthy families have often used money to shape political outcomes in their favour, sometimes in ways that harm the broader public interest. Environmental destruction in pursuit of profit is another problematic aspect of how some fortunes were built. Mining companies that left landscapes scarred and poisoned, timber companies that clear-cut forests, oil companies that polluted water and air. These activities generated wealth that families now preserve carefully, but the environmental costs were borne by others and by future generations. Some old money families now champion environmental causes, perhaps partly out of genuine concern, but perhaps also out of guilt about past harm. Let's think about tax avoidance and the ways that old money families have sometimes bent or broken rules to minimise their tax obligations. We've discussed legal tax strategies, but there's a history of families going beyond legal optimization into evasion, into hiding wealth in offshore accounts, into using shell companies and complex structures specifically to deceive tax authorities. Some of this has been exposed through leaks like the Panama Papers and Paradise Papers, revealing how even supposedly respectable old money families sometimes engage in questionable practices to avoid paying taxes. The argument in favour of aggressive tax minimisation is that families have a right to arrange their affairs legally to reduce taxes, that it's government's responsibility to write good tax laws, not families' responsibility to pay more than legally required. This is true as far as it goes. But there's a difference between legal tax planning and schemes specifically designed to exploit loopholes or hide wealth from tax authorities. The latter crosses ethical lines even if it's technically legal, or if enforcement is difficult. Let's consider the ways that old money families have sometimes used their wealth to escape consequences for bad behaviour. The family member who commits a crime, but whose family's lawyers and connections ensure they receive minimal punishment. The scandal that's hushed up through payoffs or through pressure on media outlets. The civil lawsuit that's settled quietly with non-disclosure agreements. Wealth can insulate people from the justice system that most people face, creating a kind of two-tier system where the rich play by different rules. This is perhaps most visible in cases involving sexual assault or harassment. Allegations against wealthy individuals are sometimes resolved through confidential settlements that require victims to remain silent. The perpetrator faces no criminal charges, no public consequences, no professional damage. They're free to continue as before while the victim is paid for silence. This pattern, which has been exposed in various high-profile cases, shows how wealth can enable predatory behavior to continue unchecked because consequences can be bought off. Addiction to wealth itself is a problem that's rarely discussed but that affects some old money families. Just as individuals can become addicted to substances or behaviors, families and individuals can become so focused on wealth preservation and accumulation that it becomes pathological. Every decision is evaluated solely through the lens of financial impact. Relationships are reduced to financial calculations. Experiences are valued based on cost rather than meaning. The wealth that was supposed to provide freedom instead becomes a prison, with families unable to think about anything except protecting and growing their capital. This manifests in various ways. The family that refuses to sell a deteriorating property, even though it costs more to maintain than it's worth, because selling would reduce the capital base. The individual who won't help a struggling family member because it would reduce their personal inheritance. The family foundation that hoards endowment rather than spending on charitable purposes, because preserving the endowment becomes the goal rather than the mission. These are examples of wealth preservation becoming pathological, of means becoming ends, of resources that should serve human purposes instead controlling and limiting human choices. Let's talk about the children who want nothing to do with family wealth, who try to reject their inheritance or to live as if they weren't wealthy. This happens more often than you might think. Young people who feel disgusted by family wealth, who see it as ill-gotten or immoral, who don't want to be defined by money they didn't earn. They might refuse to access trust funds, might work minimum wage jobs despite having millions in their names, might try desperately to prove they can succeed without family help. This rejection of wealth can be psychologically healthy in some ways. It's an attempt to forge independent identity, to achieve something through one's own efforts, to escape the psychological burdens of inherited privilege. But it can also be quite difficult. Living poor when you have access to wealth requires constant effort and creates constant temptation. It can strain relationships with family members who don't understand the rejection, and it doesn't actually address systemic inequality or the problematic ways wealth operates. One person living simply while maintaining wealth doesn't change the broader system. Some heirs resolve this tension by accepting the wealth but then giving most of it away, either through philanthropy during their lifetimes or by leaving minimal inheritances to their own children. They view themselves as the generation that ends the family dynasty, that returns the wealth to society rather than continuing to concentrate it. Whether this is admirable or foolish depends on your perspective. From one angle, it's taking responsibility and making amends for historical injustices. From another angle, it's squandering opportunities to do good across multiple generations. Some old money individuals genuinely believe that their wealth is deserved and beneficial. They point to their family's histories of philanthropy, to jobs created by family businesses, to cultural institutions supported by family giving. They argue that concentrated wealth in responsible hands does more good than that same wealth would do if dispersed through taxation and government programs. They see themselves as good stewards performing valuable social functions that justify their privileged position. This view has some validity. Old money families do support important institutions. Their philanthropy does create value. Their long-term perspective on investment and stewardship does have advantages over short-term thinking. But this view also has a self-serving quality, justifying privilege by pointing to how that privilege is used, while not addressing the fundamental question of whether such extreme concentration of wealth is compatible with democracy and equality of opportunity. Estate tax increases face similar opposition. The current estate tax exempts estates below roughly $12 million for individuals and double that for couples, meaning only the wealthiest pay it. Old money families argue that estate taxes force families to sell businesses to pay tax bills, that they represent double taxation, that they discourage saving and investment. Critics argue that inherited wealth is the least deserved form of wealth, that estate taxes promote equality of opportunity by preventing excessive concentration across generations, that exemptions are already so high that only the very wealthiest are affected. Income tax increases on the highest earners face less opposition from old money because they often don't have much traditional income. Their wealth is in assets that appreciate rather than generating salary or wages. They might even support higher income taxes as a way to deflect attention from wealth taxes and estate taxes that would affect them more directly. Some old money families are adapting by becoming more public about their philanthropy, by engaging with social media strategically, by trying to shape their public image rather than avoiding public presence entirely. Others are doubling down on privacy, using legal tools and privacy services to minimize their online footprints, refusing public engagement, hoping to wait out the current moment of heightened attention to wealth inequality. The second lesson is about the power of structure over willpower. Old money families don't rely on individuals to make good choices consistently. They create structures, trusts, family offices, governance systems that make good choices easier and bad choices harder. They remove temptation rather than relying on resisting it. This principle applies at any wealth level. Consider retirement savings. You could rely on your willpower to save money each month, manually transferring funds from checking to savings or investment accounts. But this requires consistent discipline, and life has a way of creating reasons not to save in any particular month. Old money's approach would be to automate it. Set up automatic transfers so the money is saved before you can spend it. Make the default action the one that serves long-term interests. This is structure over willpower, and it works. The same principle applies to avoiding debt. Rather than relying on willpower not to overspend on credit cards, you might not carry credit cards, or you might use systems that prevent spending money you don't have. Old money families avoid consumer debt because they view it as financially foolish, and because their structures make it difficult to accumulate. Most people could benefit from this discipline even at much smaller scales. The interest saved by avoiding credit card debt compounds just as meaningfully for someone making $50,000 per year as for someone managing $50 million. The third lesson is about the value of education and cultural capital, not just financial capital. Old money families invest heavily in their children's education, not primarily for career purposes, but for development and for access to networks. This is something that people at many economic levels can emulate within their means. Education, formal and informal, is perhaps the most reliable way to build advantages that persist across generations. This doesn't necessarily mean expensive private schools, though those are valuable if accessible. It means prioritizing learning, reading to children, exposing them to cultural experiences, teaching them to think critically and to communicate effectively. It means instilling curiosity and love of learning, rather than just checking boxes for credentials. These things don't require great wealth, but they do require intentionality and time and effort. They're investments that compound across lifetimes, just as financial investments compound. The fourth lesson is about the importance of values alongside resources. Old money families that successfully preserve wealth across generations do so partly by transmitting values about stewardship, about responsibility, about the purpose of wealth beyond consumption. Families at any economic level can and should think about what values they want to pass on. What really matters? What should children learn about money, about work, about treating others, about contributing to community? These values don't transmit automatically. They require conscious effort, modeling behavior, having explicit conversations, creating family cultures that embody what you believe. An old money family might do this through formal family meetings and written mission statements. A middle-class family might do it through regular family dinners where these topics are discussed, through volunteer work done together, through how parents talk about their own work and financial decisions. The specific mechanisms differ, but the underlying principle, that values must be actively transmitted, applies universally. Be very cautious about going into business with family members unless you have very clear roles, decision-making processes, and exit strategies. Be thoughtful about how you structure inheritances to minimize conflict among children. These aren't easy conversations and many families avoid them. But the avoidance often creates worse problems down the road. Old money families that successfully navigate these issues do so through explicit discussion and formal structures. Everyone may not like the outcomes, but at least they're clear about expectations and processes. Let's think now about which aspects of old money culture should perhaps not be emulated, because not everything old money does is admirable or worth copying. The extreme focus on wealth preservation taken to its logical extreme can become unhealthy. Life is for living, not just for accumulating and passing on resources. Finding balance between providing for the future and enjoying the present is crucial. Old money sometimes errs too far toward preservation, sacrificing present well-being and life satisfaction for abstract future benefit. The social exclusivity and snobbery that often characterizes old money culture is also something to old money's approach to risk management. Spreading risk, maintaining redundancy, protecting against catastrophic outcomes also has policy implications. Society should perhaps think more about resilience and less about optimization. A system optimized for maximum efficiency in normal times may be very fragile when unusual stresses hit. Building in redundancy, maintaining backup systems, spreading risk, these old money approaches to protecting wealth could inform how we structure infrastructure, financial systems, supply chains, healthcare systems. The emphasis on education and cultural capital that old money families maintain suggests that education policy should perhaps think more broadly than job training. Yes, education should provide skills for employment, but it should also develop intellectual capabilities, cultural knowledge, social skills, networks, all the things that old money children receive through elite education. How might public education provide more of these benefits? This isn't about mimicking private schools exactly, but about taking seriously the non-vocational benefits of education and trying to provide them more broadly. Let's think about what old money's challenges and failures teach us about policy. The conflicts over inheritance, the family members who squander wealth, the psychological damage that inherited privilege creates, all of these suggest that unlimited inherited wealth might not be good even for the inheritors themselves. This provides an argument for estate taxes and for limits on dynasty trust that allow wealth to pass untaxed across multiple generations. Not confiscatory taxation, but enough taxation to prevent the kind of multi-generational accumulation that creates harmful levels of inequality and that may not even serve inheritors' well-being. The ways that old money has historically used political influence to protect its interests suggest the need for campaign finance reform and for limits on money's influence in politics. When concentrated wealth can shape policy through lobbying and political contributions, democratic decision-making is compromised. Creating fairer political systems that reduce money's influence would serve most people's interests even if it challenged old money's ability to protect its position. The historical injustices, slavery, labour exploitation, environmental destruction that underlie some old money fortunes suggest the potential value of reparations or of wealth taxes that, however imperfectly, redistribute resources accumulated through problematic means.